anyone anywhere understands the symbolism of standing rather than sitting. But the harsh consonantal sounds in the word uttishta do not carry over into words like rise up or even stand. The second difficulty with teaching the literary values of a work, especially a poetic work, in translation is that almost every word has resonances, what in Indian poetics is called dhwani. And almost every poet plays with words. This is across language. So one can teach the political and historical values, that is, what light does the work shed on the politics of its day or on politics in general, and what does it tell us about the history of the place where it was written, or maybe about history in general. But teaching its literary values is a whole different thing. Let's go to the next slide, please. गमे हस्ती का असद किस से हो जुज मर्ग इलाज शमा हर रंग में जलती है सहर होने तक. Ghalib says, what but death can cure the grief of existence? The lamp burns in every color until dawn. Now, the sentiment in the first line, the grief of existence, that's found in many poems worldwide, or that this too solid flesh would melt. We all experience this. But rang in the second line, you can only translate it as color. It's not simply color. The poet is playing here on the...
It hasn't come on. The slide hasn't come on.
Okay. Please go to the slide, the Ghalib slide, which is the next. Yeah, now. One would need at least a paragraph. The poet is playing on the many meanings of the word rang, which is... One would need at least a paragraph to explain the mystical, aesthetic, and poetic meanings of rang. Indians absorb these meanings from many sources, including film songs. So you can read a paragraph, you can give the student a paragraph explaining what rang is. You may understand the meanings by then, but by then you've lost the direct impact of the line. My point then is that Shakespeare is global, not because of translations and adaptations, but because of the power of his language. Now, we all have a compulsion. We all want to research or write about something new. And when we write about, say, a Marathi translation of A Midsummer Night's Dream, or an adaptation of that play, which changes and modernizes the words, we are certainly writing about something new, and this will be interesting to some readers. But what is new, what we are writing about, is the translation. It's not Shakespeare. When writing about the translation, we could compare the resonances of words in Shakespeare with the resonances in the translation. I'll do a bit of this, and such a project may shed some light on Shakespeare, but it's likely to shed much more light on the translation. Now, Shakespeare's name and fame make such writings about him more interesting than they might otherwise be. If you write an essay about a Bengali translation of any other Renaissance dramatist, say Middleton, your work won't get half the traction that writing about a translation of Shakespeare will get. And this happens in English as well. I've recently written an article on the recent novel and film Hamnet, which distort the facts of Shakespeare's life and work in order to exploit his fame. And the tactic worked. The actress who played Shakespeare's wife won an Oscar for a role which had almost nothing to do with his real-life wife. His real-life wife was certainly not a witchy woman living in the forest and raising a falcon. The film might as well have made his wife into an illegitimate sister of Queen Elizabeth. Given Henry VIII's predilections, that would have more chance of being accurate, except that Henry died a few years before Shakespeare's wife Anne Hathaway was born. But when we are busy adapting, who cares about a discrepancy like that? However, India does have a tradition, as do English-speaking scholars in almost all countries, of illuminating aspects of Shakespeare's plays by new interpretations and by performances that do not change the words, but that interpret the plays. And every performance does this. Every performance interprets the plays. There's a strong Indian tradition of such critical commentary. As long ago as the 19th century, Sister Nivedita, who lived in India from 1898 to 1911, she wrote, and I quote, she wrote about I'm quoting, Hindu life in the city of Calcutta, a world in which men in loincloths, seated on door sills in industry lanes, said things about Shakespeare and Shelley that some of us would go far to hear, unquote. Now, as we know, Shakespeare did not invent the plots of the vast majority of his plays. So there's nothing particularly Shakespearean about them, except the changes that he made. The plots are not his. He made some changes. He developed unforgettable characters, but he didn't invent most of these characters. He took the characters from the sources, but he made them unforgettable by transforming them through the words that he put into their mouths. That is, through his language. And what language it is. There is a line somewhere in Shakespeare for every emotion, every rasa, every mood, every experience. And these lines strike us either when we go through a particular experience and we recall the line, or when we read the line and it reminds us of our experience. Let me take, for example, Prince Hal's remark in Henry IV, Part 1. Prince Hal tells his friend Poins that I carry in my mind the inventory of your shirts and stockings. I'm summing up. That's not Shakespeare's language. Now, we all know and we recognize our close friends' clothes, and we know when they wear something new. So we have in our heads the inventory of their clothing. Now, this remarkable cross-cultural observation strikes us with the shock of reality. And it's in prose, so it can easily be translated into any language. But when the expression is in verse, it cannot be adequately translated. Go to the next slide, please. For example, one of the most memorable lines ever written in any language is, "Thou'lt come no more. Never, 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 never." The word never has two syllables, but it functions with the force of a single syllable, the emphasis falling on the first syllable. In Hindi, this is an AI translation, "Tum nahi aoge, kabhi nahi, kabhi nahi, kabhi nahi, kabhi nahi, kabhi nahi." Now, I don't have to point out that the power of those nevers is entirely lost because Hindi has no one word for never. I wondered if a poet might be able to do better, but this is how the major Hindi poet Harivansh Rai Bachchan put it in his translation of Lear. "Hai, laut kar kabhi nahi ab tu aayegi. Kabhi bhi nahi, kabhi bhi nahi, kabhi bhi nahi, kabhi bhi nahi, kabhi bhi nahi." I have to say, in this instance, I prefer the AI translation. But neither of the translations even begins to approach the power of the original. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so let me go into a little more detail with two other examples. I'll focus here on the sound, on the meaning, and on the character who is speaking. Both these examples depend on monosyllables for their effect. Many of the greatest lines in English poetry depend on monosyllables for their effect. And these lines, of course, also employ assonance and alliteration. "It is the cause, my soul. Let me not name it to you, you chaste stars." Notice that all the words here are monosyllabic, the whole thing. And notice also the beautiful long vowels. Now, AI translates the first line into Hindi as, "Yahi karan hai, meri atma." Now, this rings entirely wrong. First, because the word cause in English has more than one meaning. In Elizabethan English, cause means a reason. So, karan, as in Hindi, here's the reason to kill Desdemona. But it also refers to the legal grounds for an action. We still use it in that way, the cause for an action, the legal cause. It connects here with Othello's use of legal language to present the killing as a just execution, not a vengeful murder. Okay, that's the second meaning. Most important, a cause means, and even at that time meant, a principle that you support, a cause for which you fight. Brutus uses the word several times in this way in Julius Caesar. What need we any spur but our own cause to prick us to redress? And this is perhaps Othello's primary meaning here. The word karan, though, only means reason. It doesn't have those other two meanings. Second, atma and soul have different meanings. In Christianity, soul refers to the individual. That soul, his own soul, which Othello is damning by murdering Desdemona, that soul which he refers to later when he realizes what he has done. He says, "When we shall meet at Compt, this look of thine will hurl my soul from heaven, and fiends will snatch at it." But Atma refers to something much vaster than the individual. Yes, it's the individual self, but it is also the universal self. And it cannot be damned. So it's the wrong word here, but there's no other word. A 2024 production at Mandi House, directed by Arvind Singh Chandravanshi, wisely omitted the word soul altogether. So Othello simply says, karan hai, "E pavitra sitaro, main tumhe bata nahi sakta." In a 2020 Bharatendu Natya Academy production in Lucknow, the line is rendered as, यही वजह है मेरी जान, यही वजह है, वजह बताकर मैं तुम्हें नेक सितारों मैला नहीं करूंगा. Now, Meri Jaan is usually used for a lover, beloved, a spouse. Meri Jaan is being used to translate my soul. But here it doesn't refer really to his soul. It will be taken to refer to Desdemona. Now, these lines, in translation, I say reduce the sublime, perhaps not to the ridiculous, but certainly to the stilted and pedestrian. Okay, let's go to the next next slide. Here's another example. You've missed out one slide. This is not the slide I want. Go back one. Yeah. Actually, go back one more. Yes. Emilia in Othello, Emilia, when she alone and unarmed faces down the armed Othello. So Othello is armed, he's just killed his wife, and Emilia says, "Thou hast not half that power to do me harm as I have to be hurt." Notice again, all monosyllables. Even power is pronounced as a monosyllable. Now the AI translation captures more of the meaning here, because the meaning is not so complex. तुझ में मुझे नुकसान पहुंचाने की आधी ताकत भी नहीं है जितनी मुझ में चोट सहने की है. But the powerful concision of the original, driven by monosyllables and driven by alliteration, is totally lost. The Chandravanshi production just omits the line, and the film Omkara also omits the line. Now, both these speeches that I've just quoted to you, Othello's and Emilia's, are examples of how iambic pentameter mirrors the natural rhythms of the English language. Emilia's lines are not grand like Othello's, but they're more moving, with their fine differentiation between harm and hurt, and their turning inside out of the normal understanding of what power is. Now, one may ask, how does it matter? Who cares if the beauty of the language is lost? I suggest that it is the only thing that matters, and let me explain this. Despite his being a fool, a dupe, and a murderer, we still grieve for Othello. We even love and reluctantly admire him. But we, or at least I, do not love or admire Omkara. Why not? The story is pretty much the same, but while Othello has to gear himself up to murder, Omkara is a murderous gangster, just as is Langra, the Iago character in the film. Both of them routinely speak the same foul language, and their lives are similarly distasteful. Omkara has none of the idealism of Othello with regard to either love or war. Othello may be inexperienced, he may be insecure, he may be self-deceived. Let's go to the next slide. But the keen simplicity of his mind cuts through verbiage. Keep up your bright swords, or the dew will rust them. Notice the monosyllables again. And he knows the painful ecstasy of love's fragility. If it were now to die, 'twere now to be most happy. For I fear my soul hath her content so absolute that not another moment like to this succeeds in unknown fate. These lines become part of the language of love in English. Virginia Woolf quotes them, and Mrs. Dalloway, Oscar Wilde alludes to them in The Ballad of Reading Gaol. If Omkara could speak lines like this, he wouldn't be Omkara. The film Omkara exploits Shakespeare's name, pretending to be a version of Othello. If it didn't do that, it would be just another Hindi film crime drama with a message. And one might have some sympathy for its characters, since they have had very few choices in life. As it is, though, the references to Othello make the protagonist seem revolting in contrast to Shakespeare's character. If you know Shakespeare's character, if you don't, then it's fine. But if you know, then everything Omkara is doing reminds you of Othello. Omkara is one of many Hindi films that convey a feminist message about oppressive men and victimized women. I have argued in my work on Othello that Othello participates in an Elizabethan theatre debate about adultery and jealous husbands, and that Shakespeare's play warns jealous husbands that chastity will not protect women. His contemporary playwrights, such as Heywood, and poets such as Edmund Spenser, had pretended that virtuous women would be protected by their chastity, while adulterous women deserve to die. Now, Shakespeare challenges these ideas both in words and in the plot, and I don't have time here to go into detail. But what I've argued in my early articles of the 90s on Othello is that Iago speaks lines that are entirely out of character for him. Iago wouldn't, as a character, say these things. but the lines function as a choric comment on the action and a warning to husbands in the audience. Iago says, I quote, "Thus credulous fools are caught, and many worthy and chaste dames, even thus, all guiltless, meet reproach." Unquote. Now, Shakespeare's audiences were probably waiting for Desdemona to be saved at the last moment, because in all other plays and poems of the time, chaste women are saved at the last moment. But Desdemona is not saved. Hindi films conduct similar debates. For example, with regard to the question of whether a wife should leave an unfaithful husband, one film, Masoom, says no, while another film, these are both in the 80s, Arth, says yes. The difference between Othello and Onkara is that, yes, Othello conveys a message, just as Onkara does, but Othello is infinitely more than its message. It illuminates the inexplicable attractiveness of a predator, Iago that is, the vulnerability of innocence, not just Desdemona's innocence, but Othello's innocence too, and the near inextricability of the two, both in society and in oneself. And this is the important thing, as has been argued. Othello and Iago are like two sides of the same self. Othello has some of Iago in him. And let's go to the next slide. As I discovered recently, the play illuminates a mental condition related to bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder, formerly known as manic depression, can involve irrational, extreme, or delusional jealousy of a spouse. This type of jealousy is often classified as a delusional or psychotic symptom and is commonly known among psychologists as morbid jealousy or Othello syndrome. Shakespeare mapped the condition before psychologists did. Psychiatrists started using the term Othello syndrome in 1955. As Freud pointed out, poets often show us a condition before psychologists tell us about it, much before, in fact. Let's go to the next slide. Ultimately, the play illuminates life and death, and it does so through its marvelous language. Put out the light, and then put out the light. If I quench thee, thou flaming minster, I can again thy former light restore, should I repent me. But once put out thy light, thou cunningest pattern of excelling nature, I know not where is that Promethean heat that can thy light relume. Now, the film Onkara omits this speech and all of Othello's magnificent speeches. And by doing that, it omits Othello's magnificence as well, and it reduces the tragedy to a sordid disaster. With the exception of scholars, no one today knows the other plays about jealous husbands from Shakespeare's time. There were many. That is, why do we not know about those who are not scholars? Why don't we know about those plays? Because it is not the plot that matters. It's the language which animates Shakespeare's characters. Secondly, and so I've talked about how language illuminates character. Secondly, and equally importantly, the language also lives in us on its own, quite detached from characters or plot. Let's go to the next slide. For example, here is a line by a villain who's himself a murderer. And he says, "This, like to a murdering piece in many places, gives me superfluous death." A murdering piece was a small cannon which sprayed multiple projectiles across a wide area. We've all seen in films how the descendants of this weapon function, wounding a person several times when killing them. We have also all had the experience of betrayal and non-physical wounding that seems to injure us almost more than we can bear. So we may not know what a murdering piece is, but we know what superfluous death feels like. Now that phrase, superfluous death, is a typically Shakespearean combination of a multisyllabic Latin word, superfluous, with a monosyllabic Old English word, death. Another such phrase is multitudinous seas. Now this combination, it's a very typical Shakespearean combination of the multisyllabic and the monosyllabic. It has an impact which you would have to duplicate in another language. I'm sorry, my examples are all from Hindi or Urdu. Those are the languages I know. You would have to duplicate it in Hindi by using one Sanskrit and one non-Sanskrit word. For example, abhyadhika moth. But this is still different from superfluous death. Abhyadhika means more than is necessary. But superfluous also means overflowing, running over. Fluid, more running over. The pain of death, of inner death, is not a one-time feeling. It's a feeling that overflows and keeps running internally, as blood does when you're shot multiple times. To me, then, what is interesting about any country's connection with Shakespeare is not translation or adaptation, but the critical commentary that the country produces and the theatrical productions that are not adaptations or translations. There may also be particular situational perspectives that are interesting. Let's go to the next slide. In my recent book, Shakespeare's Revisions of History, I briefly argue, please go to the next slide. I briefly argue that because of situational similarities between some aspects of modern India and of 16th century Europe, Indian readers and audiences, we may more readily understand certain plot situations and certain characters' behavior in Shakespeare's plays that modern Western audiences find it harder to understand. The book, by the way, is available on Amazon. Please do consider recommending it for your college library. For example, most American students, they can't understand why young lovers in Shakespeare care about how their parents respond to their marriages. Most American spectators wonder, why don't the lovers just elope and just ignore their parents the way Desdemona does, just disregard what the parents think. But Indian spectators understand the life-defining bond between parents and children. We do not want to discard our ties with parents. Most of us do not. Indians also understand the dangers of Desdemona's approach, which Shakespeare actually depicts very well in Othello. When Desdemona realizes that Othello may discard her, she says, he may shake me off to beggarly divorcement. That's her term, beggarly divorcement. He may divorce me, and then I will have to be a beggar. Why? Because she has publicly discarded her father. She hasn't bothered to stay in touch with him, to ask how he is doing. When her relatives come, she doesn't ask them how he is. Actually, he's dead, but they don't even tell her that because she doesn't ask. Her only options, if her husband throws her out, therefore, are begging or prostitution or suicide. She can't go back to her family. Likewise, in The Taming of the Shrew, Petruchio repeatedly announces his desire to marry a wife with a large dowry. Now, all of Bianca's suitors discuss the dowry question with her father. The only exception is the old man who wants to buy her. Informing Vince, so Petruchio tells one of the prospective sons-in-law, the girl is of good esteem, her dowry wealthy. Now, the suitors offer large marriage settlements, but these are balanced by their expectations of dowry and inheritance from a man who has 2 daughters and no sons. American students rarely understand all this unless it's explained. Indian students get it. Nor does Catherine's father, Baptista, appear to Indians an unusually oppressive father, as some critics in the West have made him out to be. Low-income and middle-income Indian fathers live in anxiety lest they be unable to fulfill the duty to get their daughters married. They also endow their daughters with as much education as they can afford, as this father does when he hires tutors for his daughters in Taming of the Shrew. Also, like Baptista, most parents insist in India that older siblings should marry before younger ones, because if the younger marries first, then the older ones may become unmarriageable. And this puts a lot of pressure on older siblings to marry unsuitable spouses. And the pressure increases if their younger siblings are already in love and anxious to marry. This is why the pressure is on Catherine to get married, because her sister is already anxious to marry. Once again, Indian readers of Shakespeare, we may not ourselves have experienced all this, but we are aware of it. Likewise, the dynamic of Petruchio's relationship with Kate and her family, it's at the more extreme end of the spectrum of Indian bridegroom's behavior, but it is not unfamiliar to Indians the way it is to people in the West. To Western spectators and even some Western critics, Petruchio's behavior at the wedding seems wildly comic. This is a critic's phrase, wildly comic. But to Indian spectators, it is darkly foreboding. Weddings usually take place at the bride's home, and it's not unknown for the groom and his kin to humiliate her family by behaving inappropriately, getting drunk, insulting her relatives, criticizing the wedding arrangements, and so on. Newspapers sometimes report cases of a bride rejecting the groom at the altar for behaving like this, but more commonly, the bride and her family silently endure mistreatment, as Kate's family does. So in the church at the wedding, Petruchio throws the Bible down, hits the priest, comes totally inappropriately dressed, and so on. But her family endures it. They fear the disgrace if the wedding is called off. Now, this kind of bad behavior at the wedding signals that the bride is likely to be mistreated after marriage. When she is mistreated, she often has to endure it because she has nowhere to go. The fear of having a divorced daughter returning home often leads parents to collude in her husband's mistreatment of her. And that's what I've argued in the book. Catherine laments that I am starved for meat, giddy for lack of sleep. Now, this is a complaint of being deprived of food and sleep that I often heard from married women in India when I worked from 1978 to 91 at Manushi, the women's organization in New Delhi, of which I was a founder. Women complained about this. And such women who didn't get enough food and didn't get enough sleep, they yearned for visits to their parental homes. And they would do a lot to be allowed to visit their parents. This explains Catherine's willingness to agree with Petruccio that the sun is the moon and an old man is a young woman, because he says, if you don't agree, I won't take you to your parents' home, I'll take you back to my home. Similarly, Petruccio throws food, he breaks dishes, and this is a standard type of bullying by husbands, which we know from real life and also in Indian literature and cinema. But it is important to remember that such behavior is not normative for men in India. They're not supposed to behave like this. Many men get away with it because they have power, but most people disapprove of it. And religious authorities also condemn this behavior. In my book, I demonstrate from Elizabethan marriage manuals that most Elizabethans and certainly most Christian teachers disapproved of such behavior by husbands. All this partly explains why, when I co-directed this play, Taming of the Shrew, at Delhi University in 1992, my students, even Hindi-speaking students who had never encountered Shakespeare, understood the play. It was in Shakespeare's language, but they understood it. We presented it as a comedy with tragic undertones. We had cross-dressed the sexes, that is, the boys played the girls' parts and girls played the boys' parts. But we had made no other changes to plot or to language. But students laughed at the right places, they were silent at the right times, and so on. Another example is that of old people. In India, most old people are not relegated to old age homes, they live with their children. This is wonderful for many old people, but it's also terrible for many others. Mistreatment of the old is one of the best kept secrets because the old do not get the attention that other vulnerable groups get. Increasingly in India, I noticed the old are publicly mocked, as in the jokes that stand-up comedians make and on social media about uncles and aunties, which used to be a respectful term and now is a contemptuous term. Now, earlier such contempt used to be, at least in the big cities, it may not be in smaller towns. Earlier, such contempt used to be hidden. Now it's displayed and shared as a bonding mechanism for the young. Now, people everywhere are used to the contempt with which teenagers dismiss their parents, saying, you're so old, you don't understand, you're so old. But most teenagers grow out of this. The venom is much more terrifying when it comes from an adult woman like Regan in King Lear, who produces the unanswerable argument, oh, sir, you are old. That's what she tells her father. Now, Indians can understand this better because so many old people are dependent on their adult children, and a significant number of children mistreat their parents or even abandon their parents, dumping them off at crowded fairgrounds far from home. So the contempt is not unique to India, but the mistreatment, thanks to conditions which are similar to those in pre-20th century Europe, the mistreatment is similar to that which we see in King Lear. Because public attention is focused on women's oppression by men oppressing women. So young women's cruelty to old people, which is what we see in Lear, gets the least attention. And this is not new. Premchand wrote more than one story on this issue. For example, Beto Wali Vidwa, which I translated as a widow with sons. In my childhood, I encountered such a situation. An elderly gentleman who was my maths tutor, he was burnt to death by his daughter-in-law. Now, these are the cases you will never hear about. Another commonality between pre-20th century Europe and India today is the expectation of protection that many Indian women, especially those whose fathers are dead, have of their brothers. They expect their brothers to protect them. Now, not all of us may have such expectations, but we can understand. We can understand Isabella's rage and grief in Measure for Measure when her brother, who should be her protector, and he's her only living relative, he suggests that she should submit to rape, disgrace, and possible pregnancy in order to save his life. Most students in the West and even critics in the West cannot understand her anger when she refuses. Go to the next slide, please. In his 1875 novel, The Way We Live Now, so that's only a little over 100 years ago, Anthony Trollope wrote, "There is no duty more certain or fixed in the world than that which calls upon a brother to defend his sister from ill usage." Now, this ideal dwindled in the West in the 20th century. It's virtually, not entirely, but virtually vanished now. But it survives in India. And that makes it easier for Indian readers to understand Isabella than to condemn her outright, as many Western scholars do. But all this is circumstantial. These are everything I've said, it depends on the circumstances in India. The conditions in India are changing, as I pointed out with the uncle and auntie business, and they will change further. Therefore, it's not primarily this that accounts for Shakespeare's appeal to us. The appeal is what I can only call universal. And now that's a term many modern scholars would laugh at, but I stick to that term. At the start, I mentioned symbols that have specific meanings in certain cultures. For example, the Deepak in Indian culture, right? Let's go to the next slide. Shakespeare certainly has these types of specific cultural symbols. For example, palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss in Romeo and Juliet. Now, those who do not know, many of us may not know, that Christian pilgrims to Israel carried palm tree branches. Now, we may miss the play on words here, the palm and palm of the hand and the palm tree. Although we will get the reference to hands kissing each other, palm to palm. But most of his symbols are cross-cultural based on everyday experience. For example, what hands are here? Ha, they pluck out mine eyes. Will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hand? No, this my hand will rather the multitudinous seas incarnadine, making the green one red. Hands, blood, ocean. Now, the meanings of these are self-evident over place and time. Even if you don't know who Neptune is, you will get it. A second example of emotion that crosses time and space is that of same-sex attraction as well as non-sexual intimacy. In my book, I examine Antonio's love for Bassanio, Celia's for Rosalind, and Hamlet's and Horatio's love. Now, this one, Hamlet and Horatio, is a friendly love. They are friends, but it is just as powerful as romantic love. It's the most important relationship, providing support to Hamlet. I just read Stephen Greenblatt's new biography of Kit Marlowe, which combines the pleasures of reading fiction with those of reading history. And I noticed a couple of understated but very compelling insights. Let's move to the next slide. Marlowe introduces in his early play Dido of Carthage, he has a gratuitous, that is not needed, erotic and romantic description of the older Jupiter's adoration of his young beloved, Ganymede. Yeah. Greenblatt hints that the young Marlowe, he was a cobbler's son, and he was elevated from that to a student at an elite school, and nobody knows why. And Greenblatt suggests that he may have owed this to the admiration of an older teacher for this young Ganymede. Greenblatt also speculates on Will and Kit's first meetings, that is, Christopher Marlowe and Shakespeare's first meetings, when they collaborated on writing Henry VI. Marlowe had already worked as a spy, and I quote from Greenblatt, Marlowe was evidently skilled at drawing out what others intended to keep in the dark. That is, after all, a spy's skill. Marlowe might have looked quizzically at Shakespeare and ventured on the subject of love. True, Shakespeare had a wife and 3 children, but he had left them back in Stratford-upon-Avon, and he was free to explore other pleasures. What did he think, Marlowe may have slyly asked, of the alluring teenaged Henry Wriothesley, Earl of Southampton? Shakespeare's unlikely to have responded in kind to any of these provocations had they come his way. He was far too careful and discreet, and he had no reason to trust Marlowe, unquote. Move to the next slide. Nevertheless, Marlowe is the only poet whom Shakespeare ever quotes. In all his plays, he only quotes directly one poet. He's influenced by many poets, but he only quotes one, and that is Marlowe. In As You Like It, which was first acted 5 to 6 years after Marlowe's death, Phoebe falls in love with the boy Ganymede, who is the girl Rosalind in disguise. And she quotes Marlowe, Dead shepherd, now I find thy saw of might. Whoever loved that loved not at first sight. Greenblatt points out here something that I find deeply moving. Shakespeare, who loved a man, puts his tribute to Marlowe, who also loved men, in the mouth of a boy dressed as a girl, who in the play is in love with a boy dressed as a girl, dressed as a boy. My third and final example, next slide, is that of the snail. John Keats gave this example when he remarked in mock anger that Shakespeare had, I quote, left nothing to be said about anything. Keats was joking with a friend and he said in his letter, Shakespeare has left nothing to be said about anything. Now, snails are among very few species, such as humans, which are found on every continent, including Antarctica. There are very few species like this. Shakespeare makes of snails a simile about how humans experience hurt. And the lines are so tactile that I find them almost painful to read. Or, as the snail whose tender horns being hit shrinks backward in his shelly cave with pain, and there all smothered up in shade that sit, long after fearing to creep forth again. There's a lot of assonance here. Hit, shrinks, sit, etc. While illuminating our own fear and pain, these lines also exemplify Keats's idea of negative capability. These lines enable us to enter into the existence of an actual snail. Furthermore, the lines, like most of Shakespeare's lines, have layered meanings. Next slide. Consider the word tender, whose tender horns being hit. The word tender comes from a Latin root meaning soft or delicate or young, like when we say a person of tender age. However, its Proto-Indo-European root is ten, which means to stretch. Ten, it suggests something that is stretched out and therefore thin and delicate. Sanskrit words like taruna, young, tantu, a thread, and tanu, slender or stretched, arise from this root. The word tender in English is related to words like tendril and tenuous, and it suggests both the reaching out function of a snail's horns as well as their softness and delicacy. Now, in his youthful enthusiasm, Keats was, of course, playfully exaggerating when he said that Shakespeare had left nothing for later poets to say. Had he meant this seriously, he would have been just as wrong as he was when he said that he himself had left no immortal work behind him. Not only did he leave immortal works behind him, but every immortal as well as less than immortal work written in English after Shakespeare has drawn on Shakespeare's works, either centrally or casually. Shakespeare is not only radiant in himself, but the cause of radiance in others. Now, if you read any modern work in English, from Percy Shelley or George Eliot to James Baldwin and Suniti Namjoshi and Vikram Seth, you miss a lot if you do not know the Bible and if you do not know Shakespeare. Just as you would miss a lot in an Indian literary work if you did not know the epics. I have taught James Baldwin, and my students just missed so much in it because it's full of references to the Bible. Next slide. Here are a few titles of books, both classics on the left side and popular fiction on the right side. These are just a few that are taken from Shakespeare. Now, what does this demonstrate, that there are so many titles? It demonstrates that there are so many memorable phrases in Shakespeare that can be turned into titles. And that's not true of every author. So if you, let's go to the next slide. These are just a few films. Have you got the right slide there? A few of the many titles of films that take their titles from Shakespeare. This Happy Breed, The Quick and the Dead, and things like that. Now, this range, that there is such a range, showcases the versatility, and these are just a few, an example, showcases the versatility and range of memorable phrases coined by Shakespeare. Next slide. Even in everyday conversation, these are just some of the thousands of words Shakespeare either invented or was the first to record in writing. And just look at these words and how many of them we use in everyday conversation. Critic, critical, right? Invitation, invulnerable, ill-tempered, admirable, amazement, savagery, stealthy, tranquil, useless, well-read, right? Shakespeare makes the language. Next slide. Here are some of the idioms, just a few of those coined by Shakespeare. Again, we use all of these constantly. A fool's paradise, all's well that ends well, fair play, not slept one wink, much ado about nothing, set my teeth on edge, the devil incarnate, I've seen better days, forever and a day. Things like that, yeah. Anthony Burgess remarked, he's a critic, a Shakespeare critic, I quote, if Shakespeare required a word and had not met it in civilized discourse, he unhesitatingly made it up. So what I'm trying to show you here is that Shakespeare has made the English that we speak. Others have made it too. The Bible, the King James translation of the Bible definitely has, but Shakespeare has made the English language. There's an academic theory that claims that Shakespeare is not really as great as we may think he is, or as I'm suggesting that he is. It was just a British imperialist conspiracy to elevate him in the canon as some sort of colonizing tool, and therefore we now need to demote him. Now, one depressing result of this theory is that many second-rate universities in the West are removing his works from English literature syllabi. The major universities don't, they retain them. This theory is not true because I'll give you two reasons. There are more. Because first, Shakespeare was not elevated later. He wasn't elevated later by critics. He was recognized in his lifetime as being in a class of his own, different from all the others. His rival, Ben Jonson, acknowledged in his eulogy, the famous eulogy to him, that Shakespeare surpassed not only contemporary poets and not only their predecessors, such as Chaucer, but even ancient Greek dramatists. This is a very big claim, including Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, Aristophanes. This is a huge claim to make, but it stands up. Equally as important is the fact that ordinary people acknowledged this in Shakespeare's own time. For many decades, I had avoided going to Stratford-on-Avon because I thought it would be a tourist trap. So I'd been to England, to many other places, but I didn't go there. Finally, I succumbed 10 years ago, and I was very glad I did because the church in Shakespeare's village, in the church where he was baptized, is the best evidence that his greatness was understood in his own time. Next slide. Not only does his monument, the famous monument we've all seen with the bust of Shakespeare, it has pride of place on the north wall of the chancel, but right next to his grave, in front of the altar, he is buried, and then in front of the altar, right in front, are buried he, his wife, his daughter, his son-in-law, and his granddaughter's husband, all in a row. Nobody else. The others are all buried all around the church, but not right there in front. So the popularity of Shakespeare's plays did make him rich. He became wealthy. But there were richer families than his in the village. There were the Cloptons, the Combes. They were richer than Shakespeare's family. They could have been buried there, but they are not. There's no other grave in this front row. Stratford knew at that time who its most important son was. And no other church in England, to the best of my knowledge, gave its native son or daughter this level of importance in his or her own time. And thirdly, even when Shakespeare is dropped from university syllabi, he continues to be widely read in the original English and acted, of course, everywhere in the world. His works are found in every bookstore worth the name, from Barison's and Consum in Gurgaon to the secondhand bookstore in Missoula, Montana, not to mention, of course, Amazon. So these are not just people reading it to study for an exam. These are people reading for pleasure. Readers don't mistake adaptations and translations of the plays for the plays themselves. I'm talking of non-academic readers. Nor do readers think that Shakespeare belongs to no language. Move to the next slide, please. Readers have accepted the judgment pronounced by Shakespeare's friend and rival Ben Jonson 7 years after Shakespeare's death. Thou art a monument without a tomb, and art alive still while thy book doth live, and we have wits to read and praise to give. He was not of an age, but for all time. Next slide. Believing this to be true, readers even today follow the advice of Shakespeare's friends. And who were these friends? His first two editors, but it's also his friends, Hemming and Condell. They gave us his collected plays in 1623. And they wrote in their preface, read him therefore, and again, and again. Notice the word is read, not watch. I say, notice the word is read, because there's another popular theory that Shakespeare's plays are meant only to be performed, not to be read. But the poet Coleridge rightly pointed out that the plays are written as much to be read as to be performed. From the start, the numerous quartos and pirated editions of the plays that Hemming and Condell refer to in their preface are proof of this. In his path-breaking 2003 book, Shakespeare's Literary Dramatist, Lucas Erne demonstrates that apart from being a working playwright who wrote for the stage, Shakespeare was also a poet who wrote his plays, which are mostly in verse, to be read just like his standalone poems. Next slide. Let me conclude with a note on so-called bardolatry. Bardolatry is a nasty word coined in 1901 by Bernard Shaw, who considered himself at least as great, if not greater than Shakespeare. The word bardolatry is based on the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim idea that worshipping images, so-called idols, is bad. So strong is this idea that the word idol in English, the word idol is laden with negativity. On the other hand, with complete insensitivity to the destruction of Greek, Roman, Catholic, and Hindu images over the centuries, the word iconoclastic, that is one who destroys idols or icons, is still used in English to compliment a thinker, as if destroying images is unquestionably a good thing. In Shakespeare's time, Protestants condemned Catholics as idolaters and congratulated themselves on destroying Catholic icons, thereby destroying much of Europe's greatest art. Therefore, thereafter, European and American Christians, both Catholic and Protestant, continued to condemn idolatry, mainly attributing it to those such as Hindus whom they encountered in countries that they colonized. Despite all this, readers of Shakespeare, including many who were critical of him, have from the outset been almost magnetically drawn to associating him with idols. In 1623, Ben Jonson proclaims his love for Shakespeare with a telling caveat, I quote, "I loved the man and do honor his memory on this side idolatry as much as any." So he almost says, I idolize him, but then he says, and they're not quite idolatry, I love him. In 1630, 14 years after Shakespeare's death, Milton wrote, "Shakespeare's works are his monument, which make us marble." Which means when we read his works, we become like images, we freeze with surprise. In 1756, Shakespearean actor David Garrick built what he called a temple to Shakespeare. He called it a temple, not a monument, housing a marble statue of the poet. Now, Garrick probably had in mind temples to Greek and Roman gods, but this was also the time when Europe was rediscovering Indian literature and philosophy. The Gita was translated into English in 1785, so there may also be a reference here to Hindu temples. Samuel Taylor Coleridge unabashedly refers to Shakespeare's genius as superhuman. More interestingly, as late as 2010, David Bevington remarks, I quote, "The wonder," let's go to the next slide. No, it's here. Don't go. "The wonder is not that a provincial lad lacking in higher education could have written the works that we associate with Shakespeare, but that any mortal could have done so," unquote. At the same time, Shakespeare has also been consistently derided by some of the greatest thinkers of Europe, at least until the late 20th century. Today, that some non-Christian critics are embarrassed by so-called bardolatry reveals how deeply Christianity shapes secular thinking. For me, as a Hindu, worshipping a poet is not equivalent to turning the poet into an Abrahamic god with a capital G. An icon is always one among many. That's the innate quality of an icon. And this multiplicity worries monotheists. In Hindu thought, all things are manifestations of the divine. But some beings, poets among them, are more charged with the divinity than others. So we, for example, we worship epic poets like Valmiki and Vyas in temples dedicated to them. But we also worship later poets such as Kamban, Tulsidas, Andal, Mahadevi Akka, Mirabai, Surdas, Tukaram, Namdev, many others. These poets are worshipped alongside the gods whom they worshipped and are often viewed as incarnations of those gods. This worship doesn't preclude writing critical commentary about the poet's works. Go to the last slide. Therefore, while I'm not fond of the word bardolatry, because it's inaccurate. Why is it inaccurate? Because Shakespeare was not a bard or a singer of epic poems. And it's also, that's what a bard means, a singer of epic poems. And it is also prejudiced against icons. I see no problem in celebrating Shakespeare as the greatest writer in the English language and the greatest extant dramatist in any language. My definition of a great work is one that you can read repeatedly with pleasure and each time notice something that you had not noticed before. I must have read Hamlet scores of times, but each time I notice something new. I will leave you, therefore, with Hemming and Condell's advice that has served me very well and sustained me through life. Read him, therefore, and again and again. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ruth Vanita. This was a masterful discourse, and it really sums up what this whole conference is about. We call it Salaam Shakespeare. And what you did was vitally that. your presentation was something that really deserves a lot of applause because you covered an enormous long range of issues, brought out why still Shakespeare is relevant to us Indians and to all the other nationalities in this world. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, you see, time has caught up with us. And we have other events lined up immediately after your presentation. So I'm afraid we won't be able to take any questions. But once again, thank you for something which was both profound, very interesting. In fact, it was almost, mesmerizing, your whole presentation. And it was so clear and so informative that everybody, starting from an undergraduate student to our more senior professors in this university and beyond, could relate to.
Thank you.
So I can't tell you how thankful we are to you. It was something that we're going to cherish in our minds and our hearts and our minds for a long, long time. Thank you so much.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
Conveners, will you take over?
Thank you, sir. If you have any questions, the participants, please mail us and we will be forwarding them to ma'am. After this, we have a panel discussion featuring 3 academicians who need no introduction at all, but it's my duty. We'll be beginning in 2 minutes. But it's my duty to formally introduce these academicians. First is Professor Dr. Siddhartha বিশ্বাস. Dr. Siddhartha বিশ্বাস is currently a professor in the Department of English, University of Calcutta. His doctoral work was on the screenplays of Harold Pinter. He has written a number of articles in various national and international journals. His books include Theatre Theory and Performance from Cambridge Scholars Publishing, UK, Looking for Home, Journey and Boundary Performance, a Boundary in Postmodern Texts, Essays on the Popular in Culture, and Engaging with a Nation, Representations of India in the 21st Century from Routledge, among others. He has also translated a number of works. Among his recent work, translations of The Merchant of Venice and Twelfth Night, both published by Monfakira, may be mentioned. His areas of academic interest include postmodern theatre, translation studies, and popular culture. Next is Dr. Choiti Mitro. Dr. Choiti Mitro is an associate professor in the Department of English, Ramakrishna Sharada Mission, Vivekananda Vidya Bhavan, Kolkata, and former guest faculty at the Postgraduate Department of English, West Bengal State University. Her research interests include women's writings, narratives of trauma and resistance, and translation of minority voices. Her first critical work, Boudoir to Bibi Ghar, the Mem Sahib and the 1857 Mutiny narratives, explores intersections of gender, empire, and representation. Beyond academia, Dr. Mitra is a translator by passion and moves fluidly between English and Bengali, translating in both directions. He is among the shortlisted translator grantees for the Pen Presents Ex-Salt Awards 2025. Her first translated volume of the noted Bengali author Shyamol Gangopadhyay's works, Chandoneshwar Junction and Other Stories, has been widely appreciated. She has also recently contributed to the forthcoming volume of Bengali rendering of Doris Lessing's short fiction. Her Bengali translation of Shakespeare's Hamlet has been running successfully with the Kolkata-based theatre group Swapno Sandhani since 2022. She is currently working on the English translations of Assamese and Rajbangshi literature. She also writes regularly on travel and gender issues in Bengali newspapers and journals. In her spare time, she is an amateur actor. Although I don't believe she is an amateur, she is a professional actor. And she is a profound actor to me, actually. I'm a big fan of hers. Amid traveler and music and theatre enthusiast. Thank you, ma'am. And next is Dr. Subarna Mondol. Dr. Mondol is an associate professor of English at the Sanskrit College and University. Kolkata. She holds a PhD from Jadavpur University, Department of Film Studies. Her areas of interest include late Victorian Gothic literature, the Gothic on screen, body horror, and the films of Alfred Hitchcock. Her articles have appeared in Northern Lights, Film and Media Studies Yearbook, Palgrave Communications, Humanities, Hitchcock Annual, and edited collections published by Palgrave Macmillan, Manchester University Press, Columbia University Press. Her monograph, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho and Taxidermy, Fashioning Corpses, was published by Bloomsbury Academic last year. And I would be next introducing the moderator for this session, who actually needs no introduction. She is our very own Dr. Monikinkini Basu. Dr. Basu is as the Assistant Dean and Associate Professor at Sister Nivedita University, Kolkata, a distinguished academic and educator. She previously served as the head of the Department of English at the same institution. She carried her PhD. She earned her PhD in Cultural Studies from the Center for Studies in Social Sciences, affiliated with Jadavpur University, with doctoral research on men meat market, Bollywood publicity, and film posters. Her academic foundation includes an MA in English from the University of Kolani and a BA Honours in English from Barakpur Rashtraguru Surinath College. With over a decade of teaching experience at esteemed institutions like Sri Krishna College and the Bhavanipur Education Society, Dr. Basu specializes in theatre studies, performance studies, masculine studies, and film studies. At present, she is the director of the Center for New India Studies at Sister Nivedita University. Her scholarly impact is evident in prestigious honors, including the 2024 Amitabh Roy Memorial Award for Outstanding Research from the Shakespeare Society of Eastern India. Dr. Basu serves as a reviewer for the double peer-reviewed interdisciplinary journal Mindspace and as the assistant editor of Creativitas. Her commitment to academic excellence and leadership continues to inspire students and her colleagues at Sister Nivedita University, where she is an integral part of the IQAC of the university alongside the examination board SNU. Dr. Basu, please. Sorry. I would request Dr. Priyanka Chakraborty, our Honorable Head of the Department, and Ms. Sudesha Das, Joint Convener of this conference, to come up on stage to felicitate the speakers. Priyanka di, taxi actually. I'll be calling up the names of. First is Professor Dr. Siddhartha Vishwas, sir. Next we have Dr. Choiti Mitro. A big round of applause for ma'am. Next we have Dr. Subarna Mondol. Big round of applause, please. Next we have our very own Dr. Boni Kinkini Basu. A big round of applause, please. সব রেখে দেওয়া হবে।
Hello. Having generous seniors in academia has its own advantages. So what I did was almost kidnapped everyone and said that there is a session which we need you to take active part in. And everyone was like, "Kobe eta?" Expecting 2 to 3 months of time. I said, "Hey, though, sir, so Mongolbar. Ma'am, Mongolbar." So, and everybody was like taking advantage of being, somebody who loves you. So this is how this panel was planned. So it was not planned at all. So it's an impromptu panel to begin with. Secondly, thank you audience for looking forward and being present for the panel. What we are going to discuss today is something that we were thinking about, is that adaptations in West Bengal of Shakespeare has a long history now. And it is not limited to repertoire, it is not limited to performance, to theatre, to spaces of performance. It is also now an active archive by the name Shakespeare in Bengal, which I think many of us are already aware of. It's an active archive created by none other than Supriya Chaudhuri, Professor Supriya Chaudhuri from Jadavpur University, along with her team of esteemed scholars. Of course, there are entries of different write-ups, which are also, some of them are written by our esteemed panelists, and some of the works created by them are there in that archive. Other than that, there are active contributions of all the panelists here, other than me, in Kolkata Shakespeare adaptations. So that is what we are going to primarily discuss today. And my first question, all the questions are open questions, so anyone who wants to contribute to that question would be happy to, I will be happy to learn and take my notes. Now, first of all, the first question that we had thought about was that the long colonial and post-colonial engagement with Shakespeare in Bengal reveals the relationship between English education and cultural modernity. So, your take on that? Yeah, senior, I think, yeah, Shishida to the... Whatever Choiti ma'am decides, I have nothing to say. I think ওটা একটু নেটওয়ার্কের সমস্যা হয়। হ্যাঁ।
Yeah, seniority is not an advantage sometimes. But yeah, but Monica Nkine, I have an accusation. You had promised an adda, and you are here with a formidable list of questions, which none of us is prepared
This is
for.
an adda, okay. Just a structured adda.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, could you repeat the question?
Yes, we were thinking about the colonial and post-colonial engagement with Shakespeare in Bengal reveals about the relationship between English education and cultural modernity. So your take on that?
Yes, we all know how it started with Macaulay's Minutes and the creation of the educated, English-educated writers and Babu class. But yeah, Shakespeare played a very important role, at least that's what I feel is, on the one hand, the practice of Shakespeare and reading Shakespeare, performing Shakespeare, both ensured that the Western education was making its desired impact on the colonized subjects on the one hand, and also from the colonized perspective, the elite class was the practitioner. They would perform, they would go and visit the plays when they were being performed in Sanssouci and other theaters. So Shakespeare, he was like at least what I felt, what Shakespeare productions on stage, they were like both a colonial rejoinder that yes, here is the Western model that one has to follow, and also the step that the elite class could take towards being close to the Western colonizers. And of course, later on, Shakespeare made his way to the classroom, and studying Shakespeare, or I don't know, our grandfathers and the older generations, they would just recite Shakespeare impromptu. So studying Shakespeare was a cultural habit that the Western educated, English educated Bangali Bhadralok, or students from Bangali Bhadralok families would cultivate. And of course Shakespeare, when at least I can say, it took me a long time to find out that Shakespeare was actually a playwright, because my introduction to Shakespeare was Shakespeare at Golpo and Charles Lamb and Mary Lamb. So, yeah, Tales from Shakespeare. I think most of us were introduced to the Shakespearean characters either through Charles and Mary Lamb's, and later on from excerpts, The Quality of Mercy is Not Strained and All the World's a Stage. So it took us a while to find out that the real essence, as Ruth was saying, that the real essence lies in his poetry and its depiction on stage. So I think that's how Shakespeare survives, and yeah, that's the place he has in our Bengali culture today. Siddhartha?
Thank you, Choitidi. And see, continuing from what Choitidi had said, and something Ruth Vanita had said earlier in her speech, that some people think that this was a project. Shakespeare was the elite, as you said, which was a bit of something that was formidable as well for a native audience. So it could have been a project like that, but this whole theatre thing, as we know, that Kolkata being the capital of the, at least the colonial rule, and later on for a while for the Raj. And the theatres began here, and they brought Shakespeare in to entertain themselves and to kind of create this educational space to emphasize how superior their culture was. So all that we know, that project was there, but somewhere along the line, I think that this is something we Indians do very well. We appropriated that. We kind of made it ours, right? And by doing that, this whole colonial project was somehow defeated. And not only defeated, it was turned against them. Because when you think of Girish Babu adopting Shakespeare, when you think of Shakespeare becoming Indian, becoming Bangla, becoming Marathi, becoming Oriya, I mean, there is somehow this obsession with Othello, as you will see, right? Because in Marathi, this was something like Zunzarao. There was this play by somebody called A.K. Deval, I think, and Othello in Oriya. And interestingly, when in Shaptapadi, Utpal Datta is reading out those, it is the cause, that speech. Utpal Datta used to play Othello in Shakespearean, Geoffrey Kendall's team. So somehow this had become quite integrated with our culture. So the post-colonial idea that you are speaking, Shakespeare somehow is not only colonial, but everybody's, I think. So that would be the kind of response if Subarna has.
And I would just like to add the Shaptapadi reference. It's perhaps the best post-colonial use of Shakespeare.
I think when you were speaking about, on the one hand, the stage, and the other hand, the performative and the academic. So from the very beginning, Kolkata had a very early, interaction with Shakespeare. Shakespeare came to Bengal in the 18th century. So after that, I think one major thing was the establishment of the Hindu College and Derozio, and the performance of the young Bengal students in front of the Governor General, probably. And so that culture, so I think there were two trends running parallel. One was the performative one on stage, and the other one was the academic curriculum, which was, imbuing more, incorporating more and more Shakespeare texts in the syllabi. Now, one thing is, for instance, when we are speaking about performance, like Girish Chandra Ghosh, as Sir said, the Girish Ghosh had made a Macbeth, I think. He made a Macbeth, which was very faithful, if I may use the term faithful to the parent text, the source text. That did not go well with the audience. It was not that popular. But after that, in some 3 or 4 years, I'm speaking about late 19th century, say 3 or 4 years down the line, there was one play by Nagendranath Choudhury, and it was Hori Raja, based on Hamlet. And the setting was Kashmir, and Hamlet was completely indigenized. And Hamlet was Hori Raja, and he was very staunchly Hindu, and it became very popular. And what struck me was in 1925, I think, it was 1925, this entire play was, it was an all-women cast. The entire play was done by the women. So that kind of, they were professional, So layers of, you have a gendered reading, you have a kind of appropriating Shakespeare. So that went on, that was one line of the thing, the entire rhetoric of Shakespeare coming here. And the second one is, of course, the academia, where, I think the focus was less on the theatrical analysis and more on close textual analysis, the historical issues, the editorial issues. That became more prominent in academia. Of course, there was a tendency of, trying to mold young minds in the colonial fold. But at the same time, there were also attempts on stage where they were trying to change the trend. Rather, as both of my colleagues were saying, that appropriating. I think appropriation happened more on stage than on, in the syllabi. So the academic curriculum was probably more rigid. And, I read in one of the essays of Shokanta Chaudhuri where he speaks about he says, like, there are questions, like he took out questions from late 19th century examination papers. There was one question like Potosine. He took the Potosine and says that in the Potosine, which are the lines that Coleridge takes out and says, there's a certain hand of Shakespeare in it. And then he says the same lines are used in Hamlet, the same lines are used in All's Well That Ends Well. What is the line? And explain it. So you can understand, এখনকার যদি আমাদের বলতাম তো অজ্ঞান হয়ে যেতাম they took out passages and said that you have to give 2 or 3 readings of that same passage. Which one is more convincing to you? Justify. These are the kind of questions that appeared in university exams. So that on the one hand, you have a very rigid way of adhering to the texts, the text play. And on the other hand, there is a very subtle, constant, it happens, because Shakespeare also has a lot of jatra in him. So, of course, appropriation and reappropriation would be something which is very common.
Thinking on that terms, I was just wondering, how has this changed the way performance in university spaces have changed over the years? So could we talk about that a little? Because all of us have seen that when we are talking about a time where lines were plucked and reference to the context from different texts were simultaneously put across to the students for their reference, like you said. But then there are also references of students performing different plays on stage. Students adapting the plays, contextualizing the plays, suited to their university structure, reforming characters to suit their known professors. Sometimes these things have happened in different universities across Bengal. So what would be your take on the performative aspect that students have taken up in universities?
I think Shubharna is the best person to talk about this.
Yes, we can start with Shubharna actually, because Shakespeare.
She is literally, drawing students into performing Shakespeare and appropriating Shakespeare. Yeah, Shubharna, you should talk about.
And I think also creating a brand out of it. Ma'am regularly designs tote bags and T-shirts, and her team actually does that. And all of that is actively present, even in our WhatsApp links, and we do buy them. So even last year in Salaam Shakespeare, I got my tote bag here delivered by one of my friends, Aritrik, junior to me, but a friend. So he actually came here and gave it to me, said, "Tumi to jete parle na, so here's your bag." So this is the gesture, see, this is the camaraderie that it creates. And I think that is why I think Shubharna Di.
Now, we have been celebrating Shakespeare for the past 5 years. This is the 5th year. And in the past 4 years, if I try to, I'm just giving you a gist of what we were doing. The students actually were doing. I did nothing. The students, there was this, when our first Shakespeareana began, at that time, COVID was just off. I mean, we were just entering the institutional spaces. We were still very vulnerable. We were still groping with the idea of our own vulnerable bodies. At that time, we did Macbeth in English, and we were again quite faithful to the source text. But we did one thing. Since it was COVID times, we gave out masks to the audience. And, there were, for instance, and there were quotes written on the masks that the audience were supposed to wear. So, there was this one quote, to be safe is nothing, but to be safe does is, I'm forgetting the line, but it takes a whole new tone when seen through the veil of this COVID, this pandemic that was going on. Then the choicest quotes were kept for the people in the authority. For instance, look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. So we did reserve it for some people whom we loved. And, when these masks were being worn by the audience, they also unwittingly became a participant of the entire thing that was going on stage. Okay, so, there's a kind of a participation which, of course, is, it kind of makes the stage and the audience, fluid and more communicative. Then we had this spoof on Hamlet. It was done in Bengal. And it was named Denmark Damadol. So because, we were grappling with the idea that what can make, for instance, there were students and audience who were not only, from our department. Other departments came, people from outside came. So it was not that everybody was familiar with the text of Hamlet. So what do we do to familiarize Hamlet? So there what we did was, we wrote a Bengal script, and it centered around a struggling scholar, and we know that very well. A figure we will very easily relate to. A struggling scholar who is, desperate to get his paper published in some reputed journal and is getting rejected continuously. So that was done. I mean, with your permission, can I read just one excerpt of Hamlet? Okay.
So I think now Choiti ma'am has nothing to complain. This is actually turning into an adda.
So here, Hamlet is reading from interpretation of dreams. The dream is the liberation of the spirit from the pressure of external nature, a detachment of the soul from the fetters of matter. Then there's an ominous music and the ghost enter. Hamlet, Hamlet. ওই আইলেন আবার কি হইলো এত ডাকাডাকি কিসের কি পড়িস ওয়ার্ডস ওয়ার্ডস এন্ড ওয়ার্ডস এইসব ঘুরাইয়া পেঁচাইয়া কথা কন উইটেনবার্গ গিয়া শিখছো না বাপের পয়সা জার্মানি গিয়া ফুটানি করা এখানে আইসাও বাপের হোটেলে খাওয়া সব ভুইলা গেছো উফ বাবা ফ্রয়েড পড়তাছি ইন্টারপ্রিটেশন অফ ড্রিমস শুনবা শোনো what is common in all these dreams is obvious. They completely satisfy wishes excited during the day, which remain unrealized. Ki? Ki koi? Koilam tumi bujhba na. Jagya. Amar bhaidare kobe marbi? Ken? Ami marum ken? Tui marbi na to keda marbe? Tor bapre khun korse tor kaka, tor maire biya korse tarpor. Amar bap to tumi, tomare marse. Tomar bore biya korse. Ami ken marum tare? Tumi নিজেই তো মারবা ওরে শয়তান বাপের খুনের বদলা নিবি না আমারে বলদা পাইছো যে বদলা নিমু জানতে পারলে পিটায় আমার ছাল তুলবে তোমার দেহও নাই ছালও নাই আরে তুমি ভুইল্লা যাও কেন যে তুমি ভূত গিয়া একবার সামনে দাঁড়াইলেই তো ভয় চিত সেইটা না কইরা যা গিয়া মার কইয়া আমার মাথার গিলু নাড়ায় দিলা তুই মারবি না না ঠিক তো হ বেশ উইটেনবার্গে গিয়া কি কি করা হয় সব অফিলিয়ারে কইয়া দিমু না কেমন বাপ তুমি নিজের পোলারে ব্ল্যাকমেল করো ওয়ার্ডস এর পরে যে অ্যাক্টস গুলা আচ্ছা মারতাছি কবে পরশু কাইল হইব না এখন পেপার জমা দিতে হইব কাল ডেডলাইন একখানাও তো অ্যাকসেপ্টেড হয় না এইবার হইব ছায়া প্রকাশনীতে পাঠাইতাছি বেশ তবে পরশু so the idea was to familiarize that Hamlet was also a very vulnerable character, that vulnerability should come out, and also the earthy humor was brought. I decided to do it in Bengal because of the earthy humor of it all. So that was the idea, and Chaya Prakashani, the mention of it, and that is something which is very specifically Bengal. only Bengali people will understand the reference. So, for laughter, you need something very local, very specific. So for that, we did that. So that was the logic.
Yeah, I just have a question. Why the laughter? Because we were listening to Ruth, and she hates it when people take away the poetry from Shakespeare. So what made you bring in the laughter in such a way?
Yeah, one reason was, now this was a very short piece. Okay, it was a 15-20 minutes performance. One, of course, is to get the readers engaged, the viewers engaged. That was one practical consideration. Second is, we always, there are times when we cry with Shakespeare, we laugh with Shakespeare. This time we wanted to laugh at Shakespeare. There is a certain very glaring narrative loophole here. The ghost can just stand in front of the man and the man will die. Out of fright, he's guilty and he's petrified of this man. So he just needed to stand and, the entire Hamlet will fall apart. So that was, a kind of a dig that we wanted to do, but it was very tongue-in-cheek. No offense to Shakespeare.
Was Chaya Prakashani deliberate?
No, but
referring
actually
he
got rejected from Chaya Prakashani as well. So no offense to Chaya Prakashani as well.
No, I think Chaya Prakashani is such a cultural thing. You open the television and the advertisements come.
And the association of
so
Medhavi
rank
Chhatra
holders
and Chaya
that's
Prakashani.
another tongue-in-cheek thing. And see, and Shakespeare has been adopted like this forever. Right, everywhere, in all cultures. I mean, Tom Stoppard is doing it on a different kind of a note. And so this kind of irreverence is actually something that takes us to respect. Yes, so that is the idea. These our kids, and Professor Shondip Mondal of our department, he had also done something like this, a retelling of Macbeth, where Lady Macbeth is this very cantankerous, very melodramatic person who is wearing very chinchak kind of clothing. And it was awesome, and the students loved it. So this kind of comic depiction is one way of offering tribute, and the other way of accepting the narrative. Right? So it becomes ours. And Shakespeare, all the plays, they allow it. Right. So this is what I believe. That is why, yes, of course, we should be very respectful. We should be those questions that Shubarna spoke about, which terrified all of us, I guess. Right. But we have come to a different time. And Shakespeare can be adopted in these different times. And laughing, I guess, is the only thing that we can do with the time. Hamlet could, he said that it was, I forgot the lines, the timeline, that he has to, right. এখানে নিশ্চয়ই অনেকের মনে আছে, so you think of the lines.
ধরেই নিচ্ছি সবার মনে আছে।
সেটা ধরে নেওয়াই ভালো। So
অশোক সেনগুপ্ত করতেন আমাদের সাথে, ধরেই নিচ্ছি পড়ে
এসেছে। So we laugh at them, and by laughing, we accept them. That's what we do with friends, don't we?
And one more thing, it's, you're laughing, you're making the students laugh and go back to Shakespeare. But also, I also understand the readings and rereadings that the creator, the script writer has to do, because until and unless you really know your text inside out, you cannot spoof it. And so, yeah, it's beneficial to both, I guess.
Requires extensive reading. The production that Siddhartha was talking about with Shondip sir, I was the one who played Lady Macbeth there, so I know. It was first staged in Kollani University, and there was an academic paper written by Sharbani Chaudhary on the performance of that particular play in Kollani, obviously situating the local politics, the local dynamics and character equations they were completely different. So even in this department, Sister Nivedita University, during the lockdown, we had extensive performances of Shakespeare. Now, what was the occasion is that we were celebrating birthdays of our colleagues online, because it was such a difficult time and we could not meet each other. And being a very closely knit small department, we are all very thankfully fond of each other. So what happened is that we were feeling very guilty, and we were thinking that how to do this without cutting a cake. So we took refuge in Shakespeare. And in the process, what happened is that many adaptations were actually done, scripted by one of our assistant professors, Shudesha Das, who was at that point in time a visiting faculty here. And she had actually changed many of the scripts and to suit the departmental equations and fun. And so something that has always been there is the language of Shakespeare. So language is something that I think has played a very important, pivotal role in all these adaptations and the transformations, the reliability on which we are all spoofing on Shakespeare or whatever we are doing. So now, if you could talk about how difficult or easy it is to read or to read with the students of literature, maybe in not all colleges are urban, not all spaces are urban. So rurality in West Bengal is a huge issue. So you've been to multiple places delivering lectures. How have you seen the audience react? How have you found them interacting with you as a speaker, as an invited guest speaker, sometimes as a guest performer? How have you found this to be difficult? Also in case of adaptation, because Choiti ma'am has extensively done an adaptation on Hamlet with Kaushik Shen, and that has also reached quite a number of audience, which is not really always urban compulsorily. So urbanity, rurality, and how that border is being transgressed by Shakespeare adaptations, if you could talk about that.
There are two parts to your question. One is how the students in classroom or other lectures respond to Shakespeare, and about the translation adaptation thing. Sadly enough, at least the students that I confront while teaching Shakespeare, they are primarily, it's not the same as the universities. They're primarily from the semi-rural, rural backgrounds. So, yeah. So they are not even familiar with Charles Lamb Marynam. But when they enter the department, they all come with, I love Shakespeare. And that's all. That's all. Who's your favorite author? Shakespeare. That's it. So it's really, really hard to make them interested in Renaissance, in Elizabethan drama, in Shakespeare's contemporaries, and then in Shakespeare. It's very difficult, and with the semester system, it's so hard, you don't have the time. So what I do is, of course, keep in mind the probable questions that they'll be asked, but I also try to, add a performative element to my teaching. And we had Professor Jyoti Bhattacharya in class, and I'll never forget his classes. He became Cleopatra, and he became Hamlet. So, of course, I can't even aspire to do that, but I try to make it read like theater. And I point out the acting conditions while doing the text. So at least that prevents them from dropping off to sleep. And another thing that they'll have been doing of late, which I think is dangerous, is they no longer read the text. They no longer even read the notes. They watch YouTube videos of vernacular explanations of Shakespeare, which couldn't be worse. So we are actually facing a real bad time as teachers of not only Shakespeare, of anything. And I don't know about the universities. The second
part.
Yeah, I'll come back to the second part.
Okay. So, right. And absolutely right, Choitidi. And some of you would know here. One thing is time. I mean, when Jyoti Babu used to teach and Arun Kumar Dasgupta used to teach, I would remember that not theatrical, but he would be so textual. And he would, like, when teaching King Lear, no, 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 he would write that no, 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 no. And that would be one entire class. Just one word. We don't have that luxury anymore. Because 2 years to teach, I mean, we have 2.5 months. Right. Not even that. So, and along with that, the students are not that much interested for several reasons. I am not judgmental at all, and I don't blame them because they have many things to juggle. I think life is complicated. Right. We were probably a product of simpler times. So, and we were more interested. But the thing is the bombardment of information that is there. And Wikipedia is everybody's friend. And the biggest enemy, I would say. So with that, what happens is, and if you remember, I was speaking about poetry in Shantiniketan last week. So, and Shakespeare's poetry, and that is what we focus on. We kind of have to skip a lot and pick and choose certain sections which need serious engagement. And we talk about that and we kind of tell them that this is what, the rest you manage however you can. And they are very happy. I mean, at least Ishika is here and she is glaring at me. So, and they are very happy because they know that these are the places from which questions will come. So that kind of a help. But our teaching now is a kind of an overall kind of a thing, overview kind of a thing. In this semester system, don't get me started on the NEP. So, and we have, I mean, it's the best way then to engage with Shakespeare then is through performances, as Joitidi and as Shubarna is doing at the time, at this moment. And Shubarna had sent me some translations, I remember. And she will be, let's not go there. So she'll be very upset because she had invited me again and again, and she is next door. I am here, but I haven't managed to be. But then again, yes, this is what we have to do. To bring Shakespeare, to show them what Shakespeare actually was. And last week I said, and people, I think it's on YouTube, and I would very soon start getting death threats or something, because I kind of brought in Rohit Shetty when I was talking about Shakespeare. So, because this is the thing, this is the appeal, not the highbrow philosophy that is very much there. But there is also this popular Shakespeare, which Utpal Datta turned Shakespeare into Jatra. Right, and that has been done all over. So that is once again the greatness of Shakespeare, that he allows us to do all these things to him without becoming Hamlet's father's ghost and coming to haunt us. So that much is there. So Joitidi, your adaptation thing.
Yeah, but before that you reminded me of Arun Babu. No. For our first King Lear class, he came and he was almost inaudible. And he just wrote Loins and double underlined it. And that was it. And we were there for the first time, not knowing who Arun Dasgupta is. We were, didn't know what to do. But after 2 years, you realize that that is Lear. The tragedy springs from the loins. And then he went on. So there are such fabulous teachers who they have their own techniques. But we are lesser mortals. We really have to struggle really hard to get our students interested in Shakespeare. And of course, what Shubarna is doing is marvelous. I'm sure at least out of the 50 students, at least 5 go back to the real text and they start appreciating the text. That's very important. And yeah, coming to the adaptations and on stage, Hamlet has been adapted quite, I think, from the 19th century or even before that. But when we did Hamlet in 2022, I remember there was Paikpara Akhor's Kolkata's Hamlet, Ashit Bosu direction. Then there was 2006 Hemlat, Prince of Goranhata, or 2011 Onno Theatre, Bibhas Chakraborty's Kolkata's Hamlet. So those were at least those were the models I remembered. But thankfully enough, they were all adaptations. And when Kaushik and we decided to do Hamlet, we decided on one thing. The first thing that we decided on, that this was not going to be an adaptation. This was going to be a translation. And we took the challenge. So it's, in a way, it's easier for the translator if it's an adaptation, because you are using jargons, you're using contemporary, what Bratto does or what Bibhas Chakraborty's plays do. They have these slangs which depict the lost urban youth, and Bratto's play is actually about the lumpenization of Kolkata. So using language which the audience immediately identifies with is an easier tool for the adapter. But for the translator, for me, of course, it was a terrifying task. Like, how do I retain what Ruth Vanita threatened? How do I retain the poetry of Hamlet, yet how do I make my Gen Z audience interested in Hamlet? So that was a task. That was something what we call doubling in translation. Like, you are aware that it's written for a specific audience in mind, but as a translator, you have to retain that, but you also have to be aware of the audience that your play is going to be acted in front of. So that was really a difficult task, and on my part, I was very careful not to make Shakespeare, Ore Baba Shakespeare, for the audience. So I used good Bangla, but not the archaic Bangla. So, and often I used terms equivalent, which are not exactly the terms, the nunnery thing. The nunnery, I think I spoke about it earlier also. The nunnery thing always baffles audience, because it's nunnery, it's also a prostitute's thing. So, and I was determined that I will not use Beshalay, because that will just ruin everything. So I used Mott and Kotha side by side. I tried to make things that is easier for the current audience to relate to, but I also tried to use the word play that Shakespeare constantly engages with. And because we decided that we're not going to adapt it, it's not going to be Kolkata, it's not going to be Park Street pub that Bikash Babu's play has, it's not going to be the Moydaner Mritodeho Pore Thaka thing that Utpal Datta writes in his essay Dharmotalar Hamlet, the Marxian interpretation of Hamlet, from which everything started, the adaptation started. I was determined not to do that. So we were in Denmark, we had the characters as Ophelia and not Shephalia as in Bratto Bosu's play. We didn't do that. But we tried to, as Shapno Shantani, all the Shapno Shantani plays do, we tried to relate it to contemporary socio-political, I wouldn't say background, but the thoughts, the problems. And I think that worked.
If you could add how the audience reacted to this change of politics of translation and not of adaptation.
I think we succeeded, because we still have full house plays of Hamlet even after 4 years. Yes, the audience, surprisingly, what I noticed is that there were two major categories of audience. One was the older generation like us, and even older people, and one was just the young generation. Everybody responded. I'm sure the college goers are not familiar with the text at all, but they clap at the right moments, they laugh, they just turn silent at the right moments. The magic of theatre works that way, because you're also using, along with your verbal communication, you're also using a lot of physical communication. And that is so important in a good production. So it's, my work was just like the kathamo, it was the groundwork. But the physicality of it always works. Either it works or it fails. So I think in the Shopno Shundhani production, the acting, the costumes, I don't know how many of you have watched it. So they are all in rehearsal costumes. Hamlet enters with a backpack and a sunglass. So we use this, what we, again in translation jargon is foreignization and domestication. So we have, in order to portray the crumbling generation, the crumbling, times the horrible times that we're living in, we have this skull made out of plastic bottles. So that tells the audience that these are not very happy times we are living in, but it also is Yorick's skull. So, we try to use things that would appeal both to a Shakespeare scholar as well as to a person who has never come across Shakespeare in his life. So it's both the verbal and the physical that works in a play. So you can stay faithful to Shakespeare's poetry, but yes, you can engage your young audience. And of course, Riddhi plays a fantastic Hamlet. That also adds to it. And the connect that the younger people have with Riddhi Shurangana and the young cast, yes.
I think Joytidi bridged the effort that a translator puts in to make the audience comfortable or relatable to what is happening on stage, and the task of teachers that we are constantly struggling. We are at an age of 15-second reels, and students their attention span is also 15 seconds. But not all of them. I think we all have been fortunate enough that in certain batches you get some 5 to 6 students and you look at them and you teach. So that also happens. But I have an experience. I was a government college teacher, so I got a lot of transfers, and I taught in Bonga and I taught in Holdia. Hugli Mohsin College. Hugli Mohsin was, of course, way, as far as the academic elitism, or if I can call it the better of people, students who came from, students who did not come as first generation learners, they are fewer in Hugli Mohsin, Chandanagar, Hugli, that area. But the rest, for instance, I taught in Taki Government College, Hashnabad and Bonga. But what I noticed was there was, I don't know, probably there are certain students who try to find a space in the classroom. And they are more attentive and they are more hardworking. In the sense how would I say, there is one example, I can never forget that instance. There was this one girl, every day she used to come late. This was Thakur Nagar, Gaighata. Every day she used to come some half an hour late. I usually do not scold students if they come late. But it was happening so frequently that one day I did scold her. And then she was standing outside the class after the class was over. And then she said that, ma'am, my mother sells flowers. She comes to Kolkata at 4 a.m. And my father is clinically insane. So I have to cook for him. I have to clean him. And then I lock him up and then come. I was so terribly ashamed of myself that what am I doing? The gap is so wide and so unfair. And then I used to notice she used to sit at a corner. She never spoke with the other students. And so while I was teaching Macbeth, I decided that we were going to do a performance. She was the reason why for the first time in my life, I started this entire enterprise of performing. She was the reason. And then when we did Macbeth, she was the porter. She was the best porter I ever saw. She was drunk, like so convincingly drunk that, when you are drunk or when you are mad, you tend to overact. That was not there. She was so convincing. And for the first time, she was interacting with her classmates. There was a kind of a rhythm that was being established between them. And they were enjoying Macbeth for the first time. So that is the struggle that we are all going through. And, I used to show them, every Saturday I used to show them, there were screenings. I showed them Bicycle Thieves. I showed them Kim Ki Duk. I showed them Kurosawa. They were responsive. They actually responded because for the first time, they somehow felt that there are people putting some kind of effort. That also, I think, I'm not saying that this is entirely true for the entire class, but there are some people who would respond to that. And for instance, feminism, I used to take a Lokhir Pachali. And I used to ask them to read and tell and identify where are the problems, identify them. So, these were certain techniques that I used to, employ in my classroom. But yes, we want to teach in, as both Sir and Joytidi said, that we would like to be a more, text specific, and people would listen to us and we would feel good about it. That also is something which we crave for.
First of all, this is completely digressing and personal. You know why I don't go to her place? Because she calls me sir. So, right. But see, as Joytidi was saying, translating Hamlet, translating Shakespeare is doubly difficult, triply difficult, I would say, because first of all, you're translating Shakespeare. Second of all, you are translating. And thirdly, you are translating for the stage, because the dialogues must work. They cannot be just prose translations. And this is the performable Bangla. That is the biggest challenge which she succeeded so beautifully. So this is when we are talking about Shakespeare and bringing Shakespeare to us, it's not an easy task. When you are applying humor as she did, you have to think a lot. What will connect? Because it's a long bridge that we have to build. But we have been doing it and people have been responding very well. So that kind of appropriation is the thing. Adaptation, of course, but appropriation is more comfortable. So that is what we try to do again and again in translations and in the classroom as well. Because I don't know how much time we have. Almost done. So I talk about Hamlet a little, and I kind of begin like this, that imagine you are in Denmark, which is a very cold country. It's night. It's Scandinavia, so very long night. Right. And it's a castle in which not many people live. And there is this guard on the top who is guarding God knows what, because nobody in their right mind has ever attacked Denmark. They have attacked everybody. Right. So he has the most boring job possible in that cold. And when you are that bored and when you are that cold, you are drinking a little. And the king has recently died. So it's quite normal that you would see a ghost. And Hamlet is just waiting for the ghost to come because he needs a kind of justification to do what he's about to do. So this is what we can do to Shakespeare. And this actually allows everybody to enter the text. You can get to the serious part later. That is all right. But we need to laugh a little, I guess.
Now, what Siddhartha and Choitidi was doing, and of course, even probably I was doing, we were actually speaking, there is a very potent dialogue happening between adaptations. You can see that. I mean, it's not only the source text that is being adapted, but the adaptations, how they connect, communicate with each other. So it's more like a kind of a very dynamic, a very potent dialogue these days that is happening between adaptations. She was speaking about Utpal Datta, and then she spoke about Kaushik Sen. So there were, that is not going to stop. That is going to enrich not only the source texts, but also the adaptations that have happened to date, in a richer light. We can read them in a richer light.
I think Shakespeare can be seen as perhaps the most popular visual vernacular, and that is perhaps one of the reasons why this dialogue is possible, or that this session was such a possibility, and it actually did take place. But because of paucity of time, and because we have our conveners almost murdering me, with their looks that you have to wrap up the session. So I think we can call it a day, and we can continue with this discussion. And maybe if you all agree, then we can have it recorded in one of our sessions, and maybe we can have it on our YouTube channel. So if that is a possibility, conveners will obviously let us all take a call on that. So thank you so much, panel. I think we can have a photograph with the panelists.
Thank you so much. We are completely enriched by this panel discussion to the core. Now we launch into our third academic session, session 3A, chaired by our very own Dr. Priyanka Chakraborty. I'm announcing the names of the participants for session 3A. Mr. Musharraf Parvez, Ms. Ria Bera, Ms. Priyanka Das, Ms. Afreen Ahmed, Ms. Sneha Rakshit. Please come up on the stage and take your seats. ছটা চেয়ার লাগবে, পাঁচটা একটা ছটা, পাঁচজন পার্টিসিপেন্ট একজন চেয়ার, পাঁচজন পার্টিসিপেন্ট চেয়ার একজন। Dr. Priyanka Chakraborty, I would like to invite you on stage. Session 3B will be held at boardroom ground floor, and it will be chaired by Dr. Gargi Bhattacharya. I am announcing the names of the participants: Mr. Upamanyu Shatra, Ms. Shreya Chaudhuri, Ms. Aparajita Gorai, Mr. Ritartho Deb, and Ms. Nikita Mondol. Please go to the ground floor boardroom. And next, there is volunteers who are outside. Please take the participants to their respective venues. And session 3C will be chaired by yours truly. And the participants are Ms. Farhanaz Parveen, Ms. Aditi Khamrai, Ms. Trishna Das, Ms. Shraddha Malik, and Ms. Zeva Zartash. Please go to the moot court. And volunteers, please guide them to the venues. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Department of English, Sister Nivedita University, it is our great pleasure to welcome you all to Salaam Shakespeare 5.0, a two-day international conference on global culture and Shakespeare. The politics of reading, adapting, and teaching. This is academic session 3A. We are honored to have with us today Dr. Priyanka Chakraborty, who will be chairing this session. I would now request our professor to kindly felicitate our session chair. Dr. Priyanka Chakraborty is an assistant professor and head of the Department of English at Sister Nivedita University, Kolkata, India. She has graduated from Benares Hindu University in 2023. Her doctoral thesis is based on contemporary Tibetan narratives. She is a recipient of Fulbright Fellowship, Wesleyan University, 2022-23, and Asian Graduate Fellowship, National University of Singapore, 2020. She has an MA in English and Comparative Literature from Pondicherry University and an MA in Women and Gender Studies from IGNOU. Her latest publication is book chapter on Tibetan exile cinema in book titled South Asia in Alternative Cinemas, published by Routledge. She has recently hosted a panel AAS in Asia 2025 at Kathmandu, attended the ICLA Congress 2025 at Seoul, and presented at the annual conference of American Folklore Society, November 2025. She is presently working on her upcoming books on fat studies and Anthropocene. She also has publications upcoming from Bloomsbury, Routledge, Peter Lang, etc. She is currently handling the position of managing editor of Yeshi, a journal of Tibetan literature, arts, and humanities. Before we proceed, felicitate. Sir, you may felicitate. I would now request Mr. Shonindu Dam to kindly felicitate our session chair. Before we proceed, each presenter will have 8 minutes to present their paper. We will have a question and answer session after all the participants have presented their paper. We request all the presenters to focus on a concise synopsis or summary of the work and ensure clarity and time efficiency. Without taking much time, I now hand over the session to Dr. Priyanka Chakraborty. The participants are Mr. Musharraf Parvez, Ms. Ria Bera, Ms. Priyanka Das, Ms. Afrin Ahmed, and Ms. Sneha Rakshit. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Priyashi, for that long, not so much needed bio note. And as you have already been told that you have 8 minutes for presentation. So may we have the first presentation, please? Yes, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Musharraf Parvez. Before beginning to read and summarize my points. It was a very good lecture that we heard about Shakespeare and all. And after hearing that, I am at loss that what I have written. I feel like a minion. Anyway. So the title of my paper, State of Exception, the Necropolitics of Titus Andronicus. Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus shows the exercise of sovereign authority over life and death via ritualistic sacrifice, sexual violence, and bodily disfigurement. Scholars interpret this instance as a manifestation of civic violence and treatment of bodies as disposable, which resonates with Achille Mbembe's concept of necropolitics. But what is the idea of necropolitics, or a necropolitical state for that matter, and how it functions in Titus Andronicus? So Mbembe defined necropolitics in his book Necropolitics itself as the ultimate expression of sovereignty, largely reside in power and capacity to dictate who is able to live and who must die. To kill or let live thus constitutes sovereignty's limits, its principal attributes. To be a sovereign is to exert one's control over mortality and to define life as a deployment and manifestation of power. In the play, before that, we are getting into the play and integrate this political insight. Like Mbembe used two sources to he come to his definition of necropolitics. His first source is Phenomenology of Spirit by Hegel, and the second source is Vision of Access by George Bataille. He quote Hegel, how to relate this life and death relationship. The life of spirit is not the life that is frightened of death and fears self-destruction, but the life that assumes death and lives with it. Politics is therefore death that lives in a human body. And for Bataille, he quote, death is a very principle of excess, an anti-economy. He interprets death and sovereignty, as Mbembe says, as a proxime of exchange and superabundance. So in the play, how are we to see the murder of Mutius and Alarbus, Basius, or a rape of Lavinia, and finally her death in the hand of her father? We are accustomed to see it as just a revenge play under the disguise of something beyond more dangerous than it seems. The slaughterhouse created in a state of Titus Andronicus is ascertain the claim of how state decide who lives or who dies, creating an exception of rules and laws. The commencement of Titus Andronicus served as a brutal introduction to the play's death world, creating a political environment where sovereign power is irrevocably associated with dominion over death. As Titus arrives in Rome with the corpses of his deceased sons and captured Goth nobility, that is Tamora, the queen of Goths, the groundwork is laid for a clash among civic responsibility, ceremonial laws, and the state of exception articulated by Mbembe. For Mbembe, he sees war or battle like this as a means of achieving sovereignty, as much as a way of exercising right to kill. When politics is considered a form of war, the question needs to be asked about the place that is given to life, death, and human body, in particular when it is wounded or slain. To see otherwise, to position ourselves away from the dominant discourse of revenge, we need to ask this question. How Titus exert his power as a Roman general in killing, or for that matter, Tamora exert her power when appointed as a queen of Rome? The answer is obvious. Their position allows it. Titus is called in these lines, Romans make way, the good Andronicus, pattern of virtue, Rome's best champion, successful in battles as he fights, with honors, with fortune is returned from where he circumscribes with his sword and brought to yoke the enemies of Rome. At this moment, the play is at the top of Roman administration. Titus is at the top of Roman administration. After the death of its emperor, Rome needed another emperor. It is upon him to decide who will become the emperor. Hence, now the question of killing of Alarbus, which instigate this politics of our consideration, Titus has no valid reason as he asserts. Killing of Alarbus, which he does deliberately as a compensation of death to his own son in the battlefield. He says to Tamora when she begs for her son's life, "Patience, madam, and pardon me. These are their brethren whom your gods behold, alive or dead, and for their brethren slain religiously they ask a sacrifice. To this your son is marked, and die he must to appease their groaning shadows that are gone." But the question arises, if he really wanted vengeance for his son, then why he unsheathed his sword and killed his own son Mutius? He is, of course, preying on power. It is upon him to decide who lives, who dies. As Mambe contend, that the ultimate expression of sovereignty is the production of general norma by a body comprising free and equal individuals. These individuals are posited as a full subject capable of self-understanding, self-consciousness, and self-representation. Politics is therefore doubly defined as an autonomy and as a reaching of agreement with collective, though communication and recognition. This, we are told, is what differentiates it from war. Hence, killing of Alarbus is no removed from war. It is a war within the boundary of sovereignty. Like war, the rules are suspended, so does here. Titus' public announcement and the dehumanizing terminology associated with Alarbus function performatively to stripe him of civic protection and to justify act of killing as ritual imperative. And this is illustrated in Lucius' speech. "See, Lord and Father, how we have performed our Roman rites. Alarbus' limbs are looped, and in tails feeding the sacrificing fire, whose smoke like incense doth perfume the sky." Killing of Alarbus under Titus is what Mambe put as the generalized instrumentalization of human existence and material destruction of human body and its population. It is done to appease his death of his deceased son, which is what resonates with George Bataille's concept of luxury of death and excess. Now, the same situation can be applied to Mutius, originally murdered by Titus himself, to remind Titus, Mutius is Titus' son, to defend her sister from being married to Saturninus. Here we see Titus is so alarmed that when dishonored by his son, he stabs directly into Mutius' body. Here again, no one questions him. For him, he dictates who lives, who dies. While quoting George Bataille, from the Accused Share, an essay on general economic volume 1, Mambe notes, "The sovereign," he concludes, "is he who is as if death were not. He has no regard for the limits of identity that he does for the limit of death. Or rather, these limits are same. He is transgressor of all such limits." So it is very much applicable to Titus here. And it is also like he's drawing from what Hegel says earlier, that politics is therefore death that lives in human life. Now, Lavinia's physical disfigurement and inability to speak position her beyond the boundaries of political identity, relegating her to the condition that Giorgio Agamben, in his Homo Share, referred to as a bare life, a stable state vulnerable to sovereign authority rather than to safeguard by a legal protection. Scholars interpret her silence and objectification of her body as the play's clearest representation of existence deems disposable by political authority. She becomes what Mambe termed as a living dead, on the condition her mutilation of tongues and fingers, and finally rape by Tamora's son. Here the sovereign shifting on emperor and his son allows the cause and hence power to destroy her, that in order to satisfy their lust. Lavinia is further dehumanized and finally killed by her father herself in order to redeem his honor in front of the emperor and the queen, the beholder of sovereignty. This shows how power allows death drive, which is basically similar to Foucault's concept of biopower. But as a whole, we can call it under the political discussion of necropolitics. Now the instance of mother of bassiness dictated by a Tamora and as is disposable can be seen how it renders to the opposition of death that is life. Mambe, in relation to focus, note that in such instance, power which is not necessarily a state power, because here we see Tamora is not directly at the top of administration. So continuously refer and appease to a fictionalized notion of enemy. Therefore, Titus's son Mutius and Quintus becomes a fictionalized enemy as they are plotted by Aaron under the state power of Tamora. Therefore, Rome in this way integrate the model of necropolitical state in its political sphere. Thank you.
Thank you, Musharraf, for your presentation. I think we will take the questions in the end. So you may please take your seat. The next presentation is by Ria Bera. She's a research scholar at the Techno. Yes. So she's a research scholar at Techno India University, and the title of her presentation is "False Face Must Hide What the False Heart Doth Know: Reconfiguring Shakespearean Paradigms of Constructed Identity in Harry Potter." Okay, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ria Bera, and my paper is titled "False Face Must Hide What the False Heart Doth Know: Reconfiguring Shakespearean Paradigms of Constructed Identity in Harry Potter." Staging identity defines social existence across time, where individuals craft themselves to be recognized and legitimized within power structure systems. Nowhere is this more evident than in William Shakespeare's plays, as articulated in the quote, "All the world's a stage," where identity is performed through disguise and calculated self-presentation. This performative logic increasingly emerges in contemporary children's literature, especially the Harry Potter series, where characters similarly construct identities to survive exclusion and gain recognition. It is further intensified in contemporary digital culture, where people impersonate identities through fake profiles and posts to gain visibility and inclusion. In this context, this paper delves into understanding how performed identities operate as a deliberate strategy in response to marginality across Shakespearean works, contemporary children's literature, and digital culture to secure belonging and recognition. The relevance of the study lies in evaluating how contemporary youths highly perform identities over social media platforms to seek social validation within exclusionary structures. Drawing upon Stephen Greenblatt's notion of Renaissance self-passioning and Linda Hutchins' notion of adaptation as repetition, this paper aims to analyze how Shakespearean representations of performed identity are rearticulated in Harry Potter series to address the contemporary concerns of marginalization and identity. Next slide, please. Identity does not generate performance, but it emerges from it. In King Lear, Edmund's illegitimacy is not merely a social condition. Next slide. Edmund's illegitimacy is not merely social condition. Rather, it is the very basis from which he reconstructs his identity to defy exclusion and gain power. His words, I quote, "Why bastard, wherefore base," do not only challenge his position, but also interrogate the system which defines it, stating that legitimacy is not a natural condition, but is created through rules and languages. He refuses the social stigma, rendering him inferior to his legitimate brother Edgar, being similar in, I quote, dimensions, mind, and shape. This compels him to reconfigure the logic of legitimacy for which he stages his identity as a good son by forging a fake letter from Edgar with plans of killing Gloucester and acting hesitant in giving it to Gloucester. Furthermore, he stages a confrontation with Edgar, producing visible evidence of Edgar's betrayal and wounds himself to present himself as a victim. As Vandermeer observes, the self comprises multiple role identities that provide meaning for the self, associating with both their specific functions and their engagement with their complementary or opposing roles. Hence, identity is relational and socially performed. By proving himself to be a sacrificial son and defender of his father, Edmund converts illegitimacy into authority by gaining Gloucester's inheritance. Next slide, please. A similar logic operates in the character of Lord Voldemort from the Harry Potter series, where Tom Riddle's identity performance emerges from his childhood abandonment, his orphanhood, and his early life in Wolf's orphanage. As mentioned by Dumbledore, I quote, "He left her and never troubled to discover what became of his son." This abandonment and childhood bullying by other orphans get metamorphosed into ideological hatred, increasing his resentment for Muggles and fueling his determination to conquer the world, culminating in his decision to split his own soul into 7 Horcruxes to gain immortality and reign over the world forever. As such, his assertion in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets is, "I am Lord Voldemort, a name, and I knew wizards everywhere would one day fear to speak when I become the greatest sorcerer in the world," depicts how he culminatively constructs his identity to evoke fear and gain authority, repudiating marginalization. Next slide, please. However, while Edmund manipulates legitimacy while being inside it to maneuver the system in his favor, Voldemort attempts to obliterate it permanently and develop an entire new world order, depicting a supremacist ideology grounded in purity, domination, and complete change of order. This mechanism can be associated with Stephen Greenblatt's notion of Renaissance self-fashioning, which states that, especially in Shakespearean drama, identity is constructed through an interplay of constraints and control developed through performance, rhetoric, and disguise to negotiate social expectations, fears, and rewards. As Greenblatt mentions, the power to impose a shape upon oneself is an aspect of the more general power to control identity, that of others at least as often as one's own, thereby placing identity within the structures of power rather than individual agency. Moreover, legitimacy in both As You Like It and Harry Potter is not inherited, but a vulnerable standing actively showcased and sustained through performed merit as seen through Rosalind and Hermione. As women within patriarchal structures, performed merit enables them to access authority and become more visible to contest in systems which deny them legitimacy from birth, reflecting what Judith Butler mentions as performatively constituted. In this context, Rosalind's disguise of Ganymede becomes a calculated step to survive in the Forest of Arden and protect her sister. As Keys Kakurozkiza mentions, there is an essential need to perform as a way to survive. This disguise aids her in articulating her intellectual authority, which is otherwise suppressed by gendered expectations in Elizabethan society. Her self-awareness of her performance is visible in her lines, "We will have a squashing and marital outside that do outface it with their semblances." Her performative identity enables her to openly critique masculinity, including Orlando's love, and control his desires. Within the Forest of Arden, Rosalind demonstrates wit by critiquing the Petrarchan tradition of expressing love through elaborations, thereby mocking its excess, rather than idealizing love, as Cabot mentions. Furthermore, she depicts rhetorical mastery as well. Ultimately, her performative merit enables her to create proper conditions under which her identity is finally disclosed, negotiating acceptance and conditions of marriage prior to revelation, depicting how identity can be actively governed to suit personal terms and gain authority and legitimacy. Next slide, please. Though Hermione is based in a more modern context marked by equality, the Wizarding world also depicts exclusion in terms of blood status. In this context, as Muggle-born, she is rendered illegitimate within a pure-blood hierarchy. To make herself visible, she undertakes extra labor to compensate for structural exclusion, making herself the cleverest witch of her age, as Rowling mentions. To achieve it, she resorts to overperformance, using Time Turner in the second book to attend several classes at once. Moreover, throughout the books, the trio succeeds because of Hermione's intellectual pursuits, which provide them the required solution at the required time. For instance, in the third book, she unveils the mystery of basilisk traveling through the pipes while she herself is petrified, which shows how her performative merit enables her to produce knowledge, even in her physical absence, making her indispensable and transforming merit into a form of legitimacy. In regards to this, critic Watson mentions, anyone who is familiar with the books knows that Hermione is the brains of the trio. However, this recognition remains meditated since her authority is jinxed with undetectable extension charm that the trio becomes capable of accessing infinite resources. Next slide, please. The most complicated configuration of performed identity is viewed from Iago from Othello and Snape from the Harry Potter series, where identity is maintained by strategic duplicity within power and surveillance systems. Iago's duplicity results from being excluded within the hierarchical order, where he is denied promotion and recognition. As such, he reflects what Castell terms as resistant identity, where individuals in the devaluated or stigmatized positions develop alternate identities for resisting dominant organizations. To achieve his aim, he manipulates information, creating epistemic uncertainty by deliberately withholding and providing fragmented information, creating informational asymmetry, rousing Othello's suspicion on his wife and Cassio, who has been promoted in his place, as Bosnak mentions. Furthermore, staging as honest Iago in front of Othello, he carefully manipulates implants by jealousy by planting false evidence. In the handkerchief scene, telling Emilia to steal Desdemona's handkerchief and planting it with Cassio. Next slide, please. On the other hand, though Snape also maintains his identity through continuous performance, since he acts as a double agent for both Voldemort and Dumbledore, his duplicity functions under radically diverging ethical notions. His performative identity is directed at having continuous access to power and information to aid Dumbledore's cause of ending evil domination. However, beneath his moral motives lies the desire to preserve his affective attachment to Lily Potter. Therefore, duplicity functions to reconfigure personal desires by transforming private unfulfilled emotional attachment into maintained strategic actions, whereby Snape's love and guilt are expressed through a prolonged performance of loyalty. However, in this context, Shreward mentions, is Snape a talented actor? Or is this his true story? Only Snape knows. Snape must act in front of the teachers and students of Hogwarts. He must feign in front of the Death Eaters. However, he practices occlumency continuously so that he cannot be manipulated by the Dark Lord. Hence, both Iago and Snape determine how and when truth is revealed to him, influencing others' interpretation. The performance of self, next slide please. The performance of self transcends beyond literature to be reflected in the contemporary digital world, where individuals create staged versions of themselves across platforms like Facebook and Instagram to gain social belonging. Just like Edmund, Hermione, Iago, individuals stage identities through selective displays by curating post interactions and various hashtags. This associated with Goffman's dramaturgical analysis, which suggests that individuals actively endeavor to control impressions that others develop of them by presenting themselves in manners that will make others respond favorably. Therefore, the study above foregrounds performative identity as a transhistorical mechanism, illustrating how Shakespearean articulation of constructed identity reemerges in contemporary texts like Harry Potter and extends into the digital world. The strategic performances of Edmund, Rosalind, and Iago find reconfiguration in contemporary figures like Voldemort, Hermione, and Snape, exposing that identity continues to be negotiated and legitimized through performance across social cultural contexts. This continuity demonstrates that the compulsion towards performative self-presentation is structurally persistent, influencing both literary and lived realities, thereby justifying the title, "False Face Must Hide What the False Heart Doth Know." Thank you.
Thank you, Ria, for the presentation. I'm sure we will have a lot of questions from the presentation because that was quite of interesting topic. The next student is Priyanka Das, who is obviously our UG student. She is in UG 6th semester, Sister Nivedita University, and she will be talking on gazing back, rewriting Ophelia's fate in the digital age. To all the participants, I would request you to kindly stick to the time. Please go ahead.
So in Shakespeare's Hamlet, Ophelia exists primarily as a silent subject, a tragic figure whose madness, drowning, and subsequent death are narrated by others rather than performed by herself. Next slide, please. She exists, as Eileen Showalter argues, only as a cubist figure of multiple perspectives, fragmented across centuries of representations. Extending this argument, this paper focuses on what drives their fragmentation. It proposes that it is the direction of the gaze, who controls it and what each medium makes possible, determines whether Ophelia is denied an agency or begins to reclaim it. So drawing on Laura Mulvey's theory of the male gaze, it traces reimaginings of Millais' 1951 painting Ophelia, such as Davy and Kristen Maguire's hologram installations Ophelia's Ghost, the second one, and Taylor Swift's music video, The Fate of Ophelia. Each work returns to the same original image, and each time it does, the direction of the gaze shifts. Next slide, please. Millais' 1851 painting performs not only the objectification of Ophelia, but it also shows the erasure of the condition under which she could be seen as an object. The subject, I mean. The composition distributes visual attention equally across the dying woman and the botanical details surrounding her. Each flower is rendered with the same precision as her parted mouth, her open eyes, or sinking body. It positions Ophelia in Mulvey's terms to satisfy the determining male gaze. Showalter observes that painting's surface appears cruelly indifferent to the woman's death, and that indifference is structural, as Ophelia's dying is aesthetically interesting, not morally urgent. Her eyes are open, as we can see in the painting, but they do not look back, leaving the viewer's gaze unopposed and unaccountable. Moving on to the next slide. This is the second case study I have taken. Davy and Kristen Maguire's hologram installation, Ophelia's Ghost, makes looking an act of responsibility. The installation projects a three-dimensional hologram of drowning Ophelia onto the surface of water in a coffin-like tube. The viewer looks down at drowning Ophelia, physically inhabiting the voyeuristic position Mulvey describes, but he introduces an element the painting categorically refuses. Ophelia looks back. Next slide, please. Pascal Abisher argues that Ophelia's return gaze appears to ask the viewer to act with responsibility and plunge their hands into the water to pull her out, casting the viewer into the role of Gertrude. This digital intervention removes the comfort of Gertrude's poetic narration and forces the viewer to inhabit the guilt that watched her drown. The technology itself breaks the logic of Mulvey's voyeur, who watches from a position of safety and control. Here, that safety collapses the captures the shift. As once the object of the painter's and viewer's gaze, Ophelia has now become more material and virtual subject, actively reaching out to the audience. Yet the installation does not fully restore the agency. The gaze is disrupted, but agency has not yet reached her. Moving on to the next slide. Swift's music video, Fate of Ophelia, reimagines Ophelia by making her the author of his own image. The video opens with Swift positioned horizontally within a diorama, creating Friedrich Hesse's 1900 painting Ophelia. This visually reproduces the objectifying tradition of Millais where it originates. She then rises, sits upright, is framed within the painting's borders, and removes the frame. The choreography mirrors the objectification, yet it reflects refusal as Ophelia steps outside the frame that has always contained her. Moreover, Swift's authorial position as the writer and director of the video, she occupies the position behind the camera that determines how the female body is seen. Her self-direction does not merely represent agency, it repositions who controls the condition of representation. Next slide, please. Yet the chorus delivers a direct contradiction. The lyrics go something like this: late one night you dug me out of my grave and saved my heart from the fate of Ophelia. The narrative introduces a male agent as the origin of Ophelia's survival. This disjunction acts as an acknowledgement that the structure Showalter identifies cannot be dismantled as a single gesture. The video's final image holds the contradiction without resolving it. Swift is submerged in a bathtub, a direct reference to Millais' painting closing the video where the pictorial tradition of Ophelia's objectification began. The difference is that Swift's eyes are wide open, directed into the camera, and sustained in an act of looking back. Next slide. So each of the three works return to the same original image and find something different in it. The shift across these three reimagining is not the image itself, but the direction of the gaze within it. And with each shift, Ophelia moves incrementally closer to a story of her own. The gaze is turning, yet the cubist Ophelia is not yet whole and remains in the process of becoming. Thank you.
Thank you, Priyanka, for that presentation. A very interesting one. Next up, we have Afrin Ahmed, who is also a UG 6th semester student of Sister Nivedita University, Department of English. And her title of her presentation is Haunted by Darkness, Gothic Guilt and Feminist Film Interpretations of Lady Macbeth's Psychological Collapse.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Afrin Ahmed. Today I will be presenting my paper titled Haunted by Darkness, Gothic Guilt and Feminist Film Interpretations of Lady Macbeth's Psychological Collapse. William Shakespeare's Macbeth creates in Lady Macbeth one of the most unsettling and memorable tragic figures in literature. Drawing on Gothic criticism and feminist film theory, this paper argues that Lady Macbeth's breakdown appears as a convergence of gender, guilt, power, and representation, rather than a simple moral failure. As Laura Mulvey argues, the determining male gaze projects its fantasy onto the female form, suggesting Lady Macbeth's body and suffering become site of visual and ideological control. Similarly, Nizam observes that Polanski creates a much more feminine and vulnerable character than Shakespeare's heroine and notes that Lady Macbeth's undressed appearance in the sleepwalking scene intensifies her fragility on screen. What the stage presents as psychic breakdown, the film also presents as visual spectacle. Darkness, blood, broken sleep, and fragmented speech turn Lady Macbeth into a haunted figure whose mind becomes the scene of her punishment. Roman Polanski's Macbeth, a film adaptation, intensifies the visual exposure of Lady Macbeth's body, making her suffering a matter of spectacle as much as psychology changes the meaning of that collapse. We must look at the symbolism of blood. In the world of Macbeth, blood is more than a physical substance. It is a symbol of moral corruption and psychological torment. Early in the play, we see Lady Macbeth's misguided confidence. She famously believes that a little water will be enough to wash away the evidence of their crimes and by extension, their guilt. However, as the narrative progresses, we witness a shift from physical blood to psychological haunting. Her guilt eventually manifests through hallucination and a complete mental breakdown, proving that the psychological toll of their actions cannot be washed away so easily. The turning point for Lady Macbeth's character is the sleepwalking scene in Act 5. This is the psychological climax of the play. Here, the repetition of the phrase, "out, damn spot," serves as a haunting reminder of her inability to escape her past. What we are witnessing in this scene is a total dissociation she has lost over both her mind and body. This loss of agency is a pivotal moment in her tragic journey, leading directly to her eventual fate. Please change slide. When we transition from the page to the screen, we must consider feminist film theory, specifically Laura Mulvey's concept of male gaze. Mulvey critiques how women are visually objectified in a film which limits their character depth and agency. We see a prime example of this in Roman Polanski's film adaptation. It highlights Lady Macbeth's vulnerability by showing her physical exposure. In his version, her psychological turmoil is turned into a visual spectacle of guilt, emphasizing the intersection. Nizam, in his Politics of Gender and Power, observed that Polanski creates a much more feminine and vulnerable character. To conclude, Lady Macbeth's final significance then lies in the fact that she cannot master the darkness she invokes. She asks for the night to hide violence, for spirits to erase tenderness, and for will to override conscience. Instead, darkness returns as blood on the hands, fear in the mind, and speech broken by guilt. Shakespeare makes her a Gothic subject whose inner life is haunted by the crime she helped create, while Polanski's film reframes that haunting through the politics of visual display. Together, the play and the adaptation show that Lady Macbeth's collapse is not simply punishment for ambition. It is a complex intersection of conscience, embodiment, gender, and representation. Her tragedy remains powerful because it reveals something larger than one woman's downfall. It exposes how violence transforms the self and how art, whether dramatic or cinematic, makes that transformation visible. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Afrin. Next one we have Sneha Rakshit, who is a PG student from Department of English, Sister Nivedita University. And the title of her presentation is The Bridge of Nothing, between Shakespeare's King Lear and Beckett's Waiting for Godot.
afternoon, ma'am, and everyone presented here. Today I am going to present my paper. Today I am going to present my paper, A Bridge of Nothing, between Shakespeare's King Lear and Beckett's Waiting for Godot. This presentation explores the philosophical concept of emptiness and meaninglessness by linking William Shakespeare's King Lear and Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. Through the lens of post-structuralism and postmodernism, the text examines how Lear's descent into madness and the trance's endless waiting both strip away human dignity to reveal a core of absolute nothingness. By incorporating Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialist views, it can be stated that this void of purpose is not merely a literary trope, but a fundamental aspect of the human condition. Thus, the work positions Beckett's absurdist drama as a continuation of the nihilistic landscape reached at the tragic conclusion of Shakespeare's masterpiece. Next slide. Okay. In King Lear, the tragedy is set in motion by a linguistic and structuralism failure. Lear's decision to divide his kingdom based on his daughter's professions of love is described as an incorrect association between language and property, where Lear fails to identify the falsity of language. When his honest daughter Cordelia refuses to engage in empty flattery, Lear famously declares, "Nothing will come of nothing." This statement serves as a catalyst of the play's disruption of good versus evil structures. Next slide, please. While Lear moves towards nothingness, Beckett's characters, Vladimir and Estragon, begin and remain within it. The play opens with Estragon's definitive statement, "Nothing to be done." Unlike the linear progression towards death in Shakespearean tragedy, Waiting for Godot is defined by a circular structure where nothing happens twice, mirroring the futility of human existence in a godless post-World War. Next slide. As the play progresses, Lear's journey from a powerful sovereign to an unaccommodated man reflects the inherent instability of selfhood. Identity is revealed to be a mere construct that can be violently stripped away, leaving only nothing. Cordelia's refusal to justify her love is more than a daughter's silence. It is a ramification of the inherent meaninglessness in trying to quantify affection through language, ultimately leading to an absolute destruction and a meaningless life for the aging king. Next slide. In the status where Jacques Derrida's concept of difference in his essay Structure, Sign and Play in the Discourse of the Human Sciences, where meaning is never achieved but is constantly postponed, because the mysterious Godot is always promised for tomorrow, a final absolute interpretation of the play, where the characters' lives is indefinitely delayed. In this environment, language fails to communicate truth. Instead, characters used a fragmented dialogue, repetition and cliches merely fill the silence and fill the void of their existence. Next slide, please. The nothing explored by Shakespeare and Beckett finds its philosophical articulation in Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialist framework. In his essay, Being and Nothingness, an essay on phenomenological ontology, Sartre argues that nothingness lies coiled in the heart of being like a worm. For Sartre, human consciousness is defined by a fundamental lack of absence. As humans are always conscious of nothing, they are something they are not. This nothingness at the core of their being is precisely what drives the characters in both plays. In King Lear, the nothing forces a painful re-evaluation of reality once the void is exposed. And in Waiting for Godot, the characters' endless waiting is the manifestation of this lack. They strive to fill the void through purposeless action and conversation. Sartre suggests that this absence is what makes freedom and choice possible, as man is being who makes himself a lack of being in order that there might be being. Next slide, please. Therefore, the concept of nothing serves as a profound philosophical and structural bridge between William Shakespeare's Renaissance tragedy King Lear and Samuel Beckett's foundational absurdist play Waiting for Godot. While they are separated by centuries, both works utilize nothing not merely as an absence, but as a catalyst of dismantling traditional structures of power, language, and human identity. In King Lear, the monarch's descent from something to nothing highlights the fragility of the social order. In Waiting for Godot, this nothingness is the starting point, a state of pure purposeless being, where traditional frameworks have already collapsed. By examining these works through post-structural, postmodern, and existentialist lenses, one can see how nothing of the tragic past becomes the absurd of the modern condition. Thank you.
Thank you, Sneha. First, I'll open the floor for questions. And after that, I think we can reserve for my comments. So if anyone has any question. Also, the participants, if you have questions for each other, just feel free to unmute yourself and you can take your mic and ask a question. Okay, since the very attentive audience don't have any question. Okay, the first one we had was Musharraf. Musharraf, I had, first of all, that was a very interesting presentation of associating necropolitics and the Roman Empire and talking about the Roman society. What I was wondering is that you mentioned about Tamora's character and how her son was sacrificed because Androgeus had the power to decide who lives and who doesn't. But when Tamora takes the revenge, how would you justify that? Because in necropolitics, it is always the person or the institution in the position of power who decides who lives and who dies. So when it was in the case of the king, Titus was in that position. But how would you justify Tamora's situation? When Tamora takes the revenge and kills Titus' son?
That's an interesting question, ma'am. As I spoken that Titus was in power, he was at the top of Roman administration. Here we see Tamora, he's not at the top, but he is somewhat associated with the state, you see. He's second
Basically,
to the king.
he's a prisoner.
She becomes king when Saturnus appointed her as a queen.
Yes.
So she is, we can assume, at next to the king, next to the emperor. So she is basically in a fit of revenge, taking this ideology of necropolitical parameter. We can justify this. It is a revenge in one sense, but apart from revenge, it is also like taking up life, death for cherishment of life. Because if she cannot dispose Titus, he posed up kind of a serious threat to him. Sorry, her, Tamora. So in this way.
But when, if you're reading the theory of necropolitics, if you see necropolitics is not associated with revenge. No. What Tamora does is a state of revenge because her son was killed, so I must take your son, since she got the power. But if you look at the theory of necropolitics, it talks about a very different situation. It talks about a very different dimension of which body has the or which body is allowed to live or which body is not allowed to live. So maybe you can look into this a little more, into the theory of necropolitics and enrich your paper when you finally submit it.
Okay, one thing I want to mention, at the end of my paper, I mentioned that it was not. He was sorry. Tamora was not in a very powerful position to make this revenge. When Mambe basically quotes, which is a derivation from Foucault's idea of biopower, he says that in instance, power which is not necessarily state power continuously refers and appeals to a fictionalized notion of enemy. So basically, we can see Tamora is not directly associated or basically at the top to dictate who lives or who dies, but not we can say not directly associated with Mambe, but to a certain extent Foucault.
No, that's what I said, that there is a difference.
Yes, but that Mambe's ideas is based on Foucault. So there, I know there needs a little bit of alteration, which I surely do. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, just look into it when you're submitting your final paper. The next one was Ria, who presented on Harry Potter. So Ria, I have a few questions for you. The first one was when you were talking about Voldemort and Edmund from King Lear. Now, I did understand the point that you were trying to make, taking from Voldemort, who came from the orphanage, who was brought by Albus Dumbledore. But the kind of life or the kind of social stigma that Edmund had faced as the illegitimate child of Gloucester, Voldemort did not face that. Rather, if you see, Voldemort was outcasted because of his special abilities. And the moment he was brought into Hogwarts, he was kind of a celebrated figure. He was not an outcasted figure. And at the end also, when we are talking about that Edmund was trying to, obviously, that part you explained very nicely, that how from nothing he actually came into the position of power. But in case of Voldemort, Voldemort was not interested in the position of power. He wanted, or he was interested in creating an alternate structure. That's why he was trying to destroy the structure.
Thank you for the question, ma'am. I would say that Voldemort actually wanted power because he came from a father who did not want him. He did not belong to the pure blood, but he wanted to develop a structure where he will be feared and his authority would be recognized by everyone. So that is kind of power. And to get that power, he split his soul actually.
Yeah, that's true. But when you're talking about structure and the life of Edmund, that is something which is little bit problematic.
There is a little difference, but Voldemort, Tom Riddle, from the very beginning, he comes from a mother who had bewitched his father with a love potion, and then he was not recognized, or he was actually illegitimate, and he was not behaved well with. And soon afterwards, his mother also died, and he was taken to the Wolves orphanage. There he was completely bullied, and there was psychological pressures. And there he was outcasted. And then when Dumbledore brought him, then also he was not actually celebrated from the beginning. He gradually developed his power through profound merit perhaps, but he had to work on it. Because the other people had powers as well. And he could speak Pasletung, that is something different, but still his abilities were similar to the others, so he was not celebrated from the very beginning. He had to work for it.
Yeah, but then in that case, don't you think that Voldemort is more closer to Iago than Snape with Iago? Because what Voldemort has been doing, that makes no sense. Because someone who gave you life, who gave you the opportunity to recreate your life or to re-establish yourself, you are continuously destroying that structure because you are not taking any revenge on your parents. They are gone. Yes. So the revenge that you are taking are basically baseless on an institution which helped you to develop yourself.
Yes,
that is more close to Iago's philosophy of, what you call it, that evil without a purpose.
Yes, but what I am highlighting here about Iago is his feigned loyalty and not the power structure he's against, which associates with Snape, because he also feigns his loyalty towards Voldemort, so that they can achieve something. While Iago's is something negative to take revenge, Snape's is something positive. He wants to develop a better structure and free the world from the oppressions of Voldemort.
Yes, but if that is the point, then it brings me to another question. Snape is being directed. Iago is not being directed by anyone.
Yes.
Snape is doing everything under the direction of Dumbledore, that what needs to be done. How in future, if Voldemort returns, what needs to be done and how you need to be close. So everything is quite planned and structured. In case of Iago, we don't have that plan and structure. In case of Iago, we have just enmity, just evil, as Coleridge has mentioned. It's actually without a purpose. So maybe you can just look into it. Okay. Without taking much time, I'll just move on to the next one. Priyanka's paper was very interesting, which was on gaze. I don't actually have a question on that, but when you are developing your full paper, I would suggest that along with the gaze, maybe you can also look into the hand movements, the placement of their hands, how their bodies are, whether they are upright, whether they are sideways. Because obviously Shakespeare did not paint a picture of Ophelia's death, but later when artists started painting, one of the most romantic death was that of Ophelia. And that's why people have so much, like there has been so many reworking on Ophelia's death. So maybe you can look at the positioning of the body, of her limbs and neck, and how her hair has been described, because maybe that will give you more interesting ideas to develop the paper. And next one we had Afrin. Your paper was very interesting, Afrin, but I was a bit confused regarding what was the research gap.
Ma'am, the research gap lies in portraying Lady Macbeth's character. As we know that she is one of the tragic figure in Shakespeare. So here my paper is presenting basically the concept of the male gaze. Like the way Roman Polanski's film shows her as emotionally vulnerable. The sleepwalking scenes especially. So I'm still developing my paper, so I would look forward. Thank you.
Last we had Sneha. That was also a very new take on Shakespeare by The Bridge of Nothing. Sneha, I would just suggest you to look at Freitag's pyramid of plot progression. Because when you talk about King Lear, there is a clear plot progression, because I was not very clear of what you meant by nothing. I mean, if you're talking about what Lear is achieving, definitely nothing. But if you're talking in the sense of plot, then definitely there is a progression. But when we talk about Waiting for Godot, which is obviously coming from a very different genre of theatre, we don't have a plot progression, and that is the entire idea of Godot, where nothing is happening.
Yes, ma'am, nothing is happening. And my take on it that Lear actually achieved nothing. He wants to achieve everything. He wants to achieve power at this old age, and he wants to have that love of his daughters, and he wants to be the most powerful man without doing anything. But ultimately what he have done is backfires him. That Cordelia dies, and he dies with the pain that her daughter died because of him. And in Waiting for Godot, that Vladimir and Estragon is doing nothing. They are in such an existential crisis they are facing, that the plot, they are doing nothing, and there is nothing to be. It is absurd.
Sneha, sorry for interrupting you. That is what exactly I'm trying to say, that in Waiting for Godot, there is actually nothing happening. But in King Lear, maybe Lear is not achieving nothing, but there is something happening. There is a plot progression that is happening. So maybe you can look into it a little more and theorize it while you develop your paper. So with that, I will thank all the presentations for their wonderful participants for their wonderful papers and presentations. I hope to read all of the papers when they get published. And I think with that, we are at the end of the session. Maybe we can have a group picture with all the participants and also the certificate, sorry.
It has been a wonderful session. Respected ma'am, we are truly grateful for your presence and guidance as the chair of the session. Please accept the certificate as a token of our appreciation. The food will be at the registration desk. Please collect. Thank you.